Gundarks, Origins and Evolution on Vancor. The Gundark is one of the most infamous names whispered across the galaxy when beings speak of raw, unrestrained savagery, and to trace its origins is to step back into the primal wilderness of Vancor, a planet where survival is earned only through strength and ferocity, where predators rule and the weak are mercilessly consumed. It is here, among rugged canyons, dense forests, and treacherous ravines, that the Gundark first evolved, shaping itself through millennia of struggle into one of the deadliest apex predators the galaxy has ever known. Their four muscular arms, capable of crushing stone and tearing through durasteel plating, are not the gift of chance, but the product of countless generations adapting to a harsh world where every ledge and cliff demanded strength, every prey fought tooth and claw, and every moment of weakness meant death. Their ears, massive and flaring, serve as both weapons of intimidation and finely tuned sensors, allowing them to hear the faintest heartbeat of prey trying to hide in the underbrush. Their leathery hides, thick with scars, tell the story of a species forged in combat, each generation building upon the brutality of the last until the Gundark emerged as the uncontested ruler of Vancor's untamed wilderness. To understand the Gundark is to understand nature at its most unforgiving, for this is not a creature designed to live in balance with its environment, but to dominate it utterly, a being that embodies survival through violence. Legends say that even the earliest settlers of Vancor learned to fear the shadows in the canyons, for Gundarks would attack without hesitation, tearing through camps and dragging victims into the night, their roars echoing across stone valleys like thunder. Hunters who came seeking trophies often never returned, their weapons useless against the speed and strength of a creature that fought not only with physical might, but with the cunning of a predator that had survived for ages. Entire cultures on Vancor wove the Gundark into their myths, speaking of them as demons born of the planet's anger, spirits that punished the arrogant who believed they could tame the wilds. Yet the truth is that Gundarks are no supernatural beings. They are flesh and blood, a reminder that nature itself can produce monsters more terrifying than any legend. The Jedi, in their travels, often remarked upon them as a measure of strength, the phrase, strong enough to pull the ears off a Gundark, becoming a common saying in the Republic to indicate impossible might. But this phrase does not merely exaggerate their ferocity, it captures the essence of their reputation, for to confront a Gundark directly is to test oneself against the very embodiment of primal strength. The evolution of the Gundark also reflects the adaptability of life in the galaxy, for though native to Vancor, they have been found on numerous other worlds, either through accidental introduction or deliberate transport by those who sought to profit from their terrifying reputation. On every world where they appear, they adapt swiftly, dominating ecosystems, displacing native predators, and carving out territories with ruthless efficiency. Zoologists who have studied them remark on their uncanny intelligence, not sentient in the sense of galactic species, but cunning enough to set ambushes, to stalk prey for days, to retreat strategically when overmatched and return when the advantage shifts. This intelligence, combined with raw power, makes them more than animals. They are forces of nature, predators whose instincts rival strategy. The Republic catalogued them as one of the most dangerous creatures in existence, and yet their very danger ensured their place in the galactic imagination. Smugglers whispered about them as curses, soldiers used them as metaphors for unbeatable foes, and even seasoned bounty hunters admitted that a cornered Gundark was among the few creatures they would rather avoid than fight. In their origins lies the truth of the dark side of nature, for the Gundark reminds us that life is not always gentle, not always balanced, not always harmonious. On Vancor, the Gundark is not a villain, but the inevitable result of a world where only the strongest endure, where every scar is proof of survival, where every roar is a declaration of dominance. To study their evolution is to confront a truth about the galaxy, that for all the wonders of the Force, for all the philosophies of Jedi and Sith, There are places where the raw power of biology writes its own code, and in that code, the Gundark is both king and executioner. They are terrifying because they strip away illusion, because they remind every being who encounters them that underneath civilization's comforts lies a primal reality. Survival is won. Through strength and weakness is devoured. The Gundark, born of Vankor's wilds, carries that truth in its blood, in its roar, in the endless terror it has inspired for generations. It is not simply a beast. It is a legacy of evolution, a predator carved by nature into one of the galaxy's deadliest forms, and in its story we glimpse the eternal reality that power, once forged, endures, and fear, once sown, never dies. Gundarks, anatomy of brutality, forearms, hide, and predatory perfection. To gaze upon a Gundark is to gaze upon a living sculpture of violence shaped by nature's cruelest hand, for every line of its anatomy is designed for terror, every muscle sculpted by survival, every adaptation honed to make it one of the most relentless predators in the galaxy. Standing well over 2 meters tall with a mass of corded muscle, the Gundark is a towering wall of strength, its 4 massive arms a grotesque exaggeration of evolutionary advantage. These arms, thick as tree trunks and ending in claws that can gouge durasteel, give it both the ability to climb and the ability to rend, for it can scale canyon walls with frightening agility, then drop upon prey with devastating force. To fight a Gundark is to fight an avalanche of strikes from multiple directions at once, each arm moving independently, capable of crushing bone, tearing flesh, and overwhelming even armored foes. Its grip strength has been measured by zoologists who barely survived the attempt, and it is said that once a Gundark has seized its prey, escape is impossible, for those claws are not simply weapons, they are shackles of death. The head of a Gundark is perhaps its most iconic feature, with enormous ears that flare outward like wings, granting them a menacing silhouette and serving as hypersensitive auditory sensors. These ears can rotate independently, catching the faintest rustle of leaves, the softest breath of a hidden creature, the metallic click of a blaster being armed. Combined with their keen eyesight, capable of seeing clearly in low light, Gundarks are hunters who can stalk prey in the darkness of night or the shadows of deep canyons with equal ease. Their jaws, lined with serrated teeth, can bite through armor weave, the pressure of their bite comparable to some of the galaxy's largest carnivores. When they roar, it is not only a display of dominance, but a weapon in itself, for the reverberation of their bellow disorients prey, freezing lesser creatures in place just long enough for those 4 massive arms to strike. To hear the roar of a Gundark echoing across Vankor's valleys is to know that death has already found you. Their hides, thick and leathery, are scarred from countless battles, their resilience another adaptation that makes them formidable. Blaster bolts often sear against their skin with less effect than one would expect, requiring precision shots to vital areas to bring them down. Many hunters have aimed for the chest only to find their bolts absorbed by dense layers of muscle and tissue. Their ability to endure wounds that would fell other predators is legendary, for Gundarks do not retreat easily. They fight through pain, driven by a rage that seems almost supernatural in intensity. Stories abound of Gundarks continuing to fight even after suffering injuries that would cripple lesser beasts. Limbs broken, eyes blinded, yet still they charge, their determination to kill their enemy undiminished. This unnatural tenacity has given rise to myths that Gundarks feed not only on flesh but on fear, that they are sustained by the terror they inspire as much as by the blood they spill. Mobility is another of their terrifying strengths, for despite their bulk, they are swift, able to cover ground at frightening speed, leaping from ledge to ledge with an agility that defies their size. Their lower limbs, muscular and clawed, allow them to run across uneven terrain without faltering, to chase prey that believes it can escape into narrow crevices or high cliffs. There are reports of Gundarks pursuing speeders across broken landscapes, using their powerful leaps to close distance with uncanny speed. To fight one in close quarters is to be overwhelmed by its 4 arms, but to flee is often no better, for Gundarks can chase their quarry across terrain that defeats most hunters. This versatility, Equally deadly at ambush, pursuit, and combat makes them unrivaled predators capable of dominating any battlefield nature provides. Yet perhaps the most terrifying adaptation of the Gundark is its intelligence, for though not sentient, they possess a cunning that surpasses simple animal instinct. They learn from encounters, remember strategies, and adapt their hunting methods. A Gundark that survives a trap will never fall for the same one twice, and hunters have discovered to their horror that Gundarks sometimes feign weakness, luring prey or opponents into reckless charges before unleashing their full fury. They fight with the patience of an apex predator that knows time is on its side, stalking prey for days, wearing it down, striking when exhaustion makes resistance futile. Some zoologists have speculated that Gundarks possess a form of proto-culture, for they mark territories with symbols of bones and claw marks, warning others to stay away. These signs are as much psychological warfare as they are boundaries, for any who stumble upon them know the land belongs to a predator beyond their reckoning. Every element of the Gundark's anatomy serves a purpose, and together they create a predator so complete that it borders on the unnatural. Its arms crush, its claws rend, its ears hear, its eyes pierce, its roar terrifies, its hide endures, its legs chase, and its cunning ensures survival. It is as though Vankor itself, in its harshness, carved the Gundark as a monument to violence, sculpting a beast that could not only survive its world, but dominate it. To study its anatomy is to confront a design of terror, a creature that nature perfected as an apex hunter. This is why the Gundark has become more than a predator. It has become a symbol in galactic culture, invoked in metaphors of strength, in curses of fear, in the whispered warnings of smugglers and soldiers alike. Anatomy and adaptation alone would make it terrifying, but combined with the aura of myth that surrounds it, the Gundark becomes something greater. A living embodiment of fear itself, a predator whose very existence is a meditation on power without restraint. Gundarks, encounters, myths, and why even hunters fear them. The reputation of Gundarks is not built solely on their anatomy or their natural ferocity, but on the countless encounters and whispered tales that have echoed across cantinas, war zones, and spaceports for centuries, stories told by those few who survived long enough to speak of their brush with one of the galaxy's most feared predators. And in those retellings, the Gundark became not just a beast of Vankor, but a living myth that transcended its native world. Hunters, smugglers, soldiers, and even Jedi have found themselves confronted with the terror of these creatures, and though many tales are embellished, at their core they all circle back to the same truth, that Gundarks inspire a level of dread few other creatures can match. Smugglers often spoke of hearing roars echoing through ravines when setting up hidden caches on backwater worlds, roars that sent even hardened criminals scrambling back to their ships, convinced that to remain was to die. In the Clone Wars, it was not unusual for commanders to use the phrase "like fighting a pack of Gundarks" to describe unwinnable situations, and even Jedi Masters who had faced Sith and Separatist warlords admitted in private that they would rather duel a skilled Darksider than be cornered by a single enraged Gundark. Their infamy grew to the point where they became part of the Republic's shared vocabulary, metaphors for overwhelming strength and untamable fury, reminders that for all the sophistication of galactic civilization, there were still creatures born of primal nature that could humble the proudest of beings. One of the most famous encounters involving Gundarks came when Han Solo, in conversation with Luke Skywalker, quipped that the young Jedi was strong enough to pull the ears off a Gundark, a statement that, while humorous, carried within it the weight of a cultural metaphor that had endured for centuries. To pull the ears off a Gundark was considered a feat beyond reckoning, a measure of strength so absurd it bordered on myth, for even to approach a Gundark close enough to attempt such a task was suicide. This joke, shared casually among friends, revealed how deeply the creature had lodged itself into the galaxy's imagination, a shorthand for impossible strength and dangerous recklessness. Yet beneath the humor lies the truth, that the galaxy as a whole recognized the Gundark as a standard of terror, a universal benchmark for danger that transcended species, cultures, and systems. Tales of Gundarks were told in cantinas not to entertain, but to warn. Their roars a subject of nightmares for children, and their claws the subject of grim boasts among hunters who often exaggerated their encounters to mask their fear. Hunters in particular carried a paradoxical relationship with Gundarks. To kill one was considered the ultimate trophy, proof that a being had not only skill, but courage bordering on madness. Yet many hunters never returned from expeditions that sought such glory, their equipment found shredded, their camps destroyed, their trails ending in pools of blood. Those who did return often bore scars they wore as grim badges of survival, their eyes haunted by memories of being hunted in turn. Even seasoned Trandoshan hunters, who prided themselves on their ability to take down the deadliest prey, spoke of Gundarks with reluctant respect, admitting that they were beasts who fought with such ferocity that even victory felt like a narrow escape from death. The Mandalorians too, who prided themselves on their warrior culture, sometimes captured Gundarks for gladiatorial arenas, forcing them to fight against champions, and though these spectacles drew cheers from bloodthirsty crowds, more often than not the Gundark slaughtered its foes, tearing armored warriors apart in front of horrified audiences before being put down with overwhelming firepower. In these arenas, Gundarks proved again and again that they were not beasts to be tamed, but nightmares to be unleashed. And the very act of capturing one became a legend unto itself, for few transports could contain their fury for long. Jedi archives also record encounters with Gundarks, though they are often understated, couched in clinical language that fails to capture the visceral horror. One such account describes a young Jedi Knight trapped on Vancor during a survey mission, stalked for days by a Gundark that pursued him tirelessly across the canyons. Despite his training, the Jedi admitted in his journal that he felt more fear in those days than he ever had facing separatist armies, for the Gundark's presence was constant, its roars echoing at night, its claw marks appearing on canyon walls ahead of him, signs that it was not merely following, but herding him, driving him into exhaustion. When at last he escaped with his life, he returned to Coruscant humbled, confessing that he had never encountered such a relentless predator, one that seemed to delight in the fear it inspired. Such accounts reinforced the Jedi's respect for the dangers of the natural world, for even their mastery of the Force did not guarantee safety from a beast born of pure instinct and power. The myths surrounding Gundarks often paint them as demons rather than animals, embodiments of untamed fury that punish arrogance. On Vancor, early settlers believed Gundarks were spirits sent by the planet to drive out intruders, their roars described as the voice of the land itself rejecting colonization. Folklore from other worlds where Gundarks were introduced often elevated them into monstrous archetypes, symbols of the chaos that lay beyond civilization's borders. In these stories, Gundarks were not merely creatures, but warnings, reminders that nature itself resists domination, that for all the Republic's technology and the Jedi's wisdom, there exist forces of primal savagery that cannot be eradicated. The persistence of these myths reveals the psychological impact Gundarks have on those who encounter them, for they represent more than just physical danger. They represent the limits of control, the reminder that there will always be something wild, untamable, and stronger than oneself. Hunters fear Gundarks not simply because they are difficult to kill, but because they embody the collapse of the hunter-prey relationship. To hunt a Gundark is to risk becoming the hunted, to feel the terrifying shift when the roles reverse, when the predator reveals that it has been watching, waiting, calculating. Those who survive often speak not of victory, but of endurance, of outlasting the beast long enough to escape, for killing one outright is a feat so rare it is remembered in song and story. Even when slain, Gundarks often take their killers with them, their dying thrashers crushing bones and shattering weapons. In this way, they embody the inevitability of loss in confrontation with primal power, for to face one is not a contest of equals, but a defiance of inevitability. Their reputation persists because it is deserved, because every scar they leave, every myth they inspire, every roar that echoes across canyons reminds the galaxy that there are creatures who cannot be tamed, who cannot be reduced to trophies, who remain symbols of fear and ferocity. Gundarks terrify because they are more than animals. They are living myths, reminders of the galaxy's wild heart, and even hunters, armed with the best technology and the bravest resolve, fear them because to face one is to stare into the abyss of nature's most brutal truth, that survival belongs to the strongest, and the Gundark is always strong. Gundarks Reflections. What Gundarks reveal about primal fear. To reflect on the Gundark is to reflect on the essence of primal fear itself, for this creature, born of Vankor's merciless landscapes, embodies truths about survival, strength, and terror that civilizations across the galaxy prefer to forget, and in doing so it becomes more than a predator. It becomes a symbol, a mirror that forces us to confront what we are beneath the layers of culture, law, and technology. The Gundark has no need for philosophy, no need for codes, no need for justification. It lives by a law older than civilization, older than republics, older even than the Jedi and Sith. The law that life persists only through strength and the weak are consumed. In every roar echoing through the canyons of Vankor, there is the sound of that law, a reminder that even the galaxy-spanning civilizations with fleets, armies, and temples cannot silence the truth of nature's raw cruelty. When beings speak of Gundarks in hushed tones in cantinas or military camps, they are not only recalling the claws that can tear durasteel or the arms that can crush bone, but the deeper fear that all their weapons and starships mean little against the inevitability of violence untamed. To confront a Gundark is to be stripped of illusions, to realize that all the comforts of civilization, blasters, armor, codes of honor, promises of safety, fall away in the presence of a predator that does not care for such things. It does not hate, it does not seek justice, it does not think in terms of conquest or revenge. It simply kills because that is its purpose, its truth, and in that simplicity lies its terror. What makes the Gundark such a profound figure of fear is that it forces beings to confront their place in the order of things. Sentients across the galaxy often delude themselves into believing that their intelligence, their technology, or their philosophy elevates them above the natural world, but the Gundark tears that illusion apart. It is a beast, and yet in its cunning ambushes, in its ability to learn from failed hunts, in its strategic patience, it rivals the intelligence of the hunters who pursue it, and it often outlasts them. This is why even experienced Trandoshan hunters, beings bred for the thrill of dangerous prey, approach Gundarks with caution. Why Mandalorians use them in trials of strength but never underestimate their capacity for slaughter, and why Jedi, who face Sith and warlords, record encounters with them in tones of humbled awe. The Gundark reminds them that no matter how far a species believes it has risen above its origins, the primal laws of predator and prey still apply, and they apply to everyone. This realization is what gives the Gundark its mythic weight. It is not only a monster of Vankor, but a universal symbol that life is fragile and that strength alone determines survival. The Gundark also reveals the relationship between fear and respect. Cultures that have lived near them for generations do not simply see them as threats to be exterminated. They weave them into myth, seeing them as spirits of vengeance or avatars of the planet's will. Settlers on Vankor once believed that Gundarks were born from the anger of the land itself, punishing those who sought to tame what should never be tamed. And this myth, while primitive, contains a truth the galaxy often forgets, that there are forces that resist domination, wildness that refuses chains. Even when captured and placed in arenas for spectacle, Gundarks turned those who mocked them into examples, slaying armored warriors before entire crowds, and showing that some powers cannot be bent for entertainment without consequence. Their image carries weight beyond biology. It is invoked in curses, in jokes, in metaphors, in warnings, because it is understood across cultures that to face one is to face death itself, and that death will not come politely or quickly, but brutally and absolutely. Hunters tell stories of Gundarks not merely to boast, but to remind themselves of mortality, for even when exaggerated, their tales echo the truth that a single mistake in the presence of such a beast is the end, and yet, for all their terror, Gundarks also inspire awe, for in their unrelenting strength, they embody something many beings secretly admire. They are freedom incarnate, unbound by codes, laws, or governments, beholden only to their own survival. They are what the Sith claim to be in philosophy, beings who reject peace and embrace passion, strength, and power, except without the deceit or politics. To watch a Gundark is to see the Sith code written in muscle and claw. Peace is a lie. There is only passion. Through passion, strength. Through strength, power. Through power, victory. Through victory, chains are broken. The difference is that the Gundark does not speak. These words, it lives them, and it has lived them since its species first stalked Vankor's canyons. This is why Jedi records treat Gundarks with such respect, not as abominations, but as reminders of what happens when passion and strength exist without compassion or balance. The Gundark is not evil, because evil requires intent. It is something older, something purer. It is survival at its most ruthless, and in that purity it terrifies, because it strips away morality and exposes the reality of what power is when nothing restrains it. The fear Gundarks inspire also reveals much about those who speak of them. When smugglers curse their name, when soldiers compare impossible odds to fighting a pack of Gundarks, when Jedi use them as benchmarks for strength, they are projecting their own anxieties about the fragility of order. They know that Gundarks exist as reminders that beyond the glow of Coruscant skylanes or the careful order of Jedi philosophy, there is a galaxy where raw strength still matters more than laws or codes. And in this reflection lies the true reason Gundarks endure in the galactic imagination. They remind all beings that the wild is never gone, that the primal waits in shadows, that even the most advanced civilizations are not as far removed from the ancient struggles of predator and prey as they would like to believe. To meditate on the Gundark, then, is to meditate on fear itself, not the fear of blasters or war, but the fear that beneath our pretenses of order and control, we are still prey, still fragile, still vulnerable to the claws of something stronger. The Gundark does not only hunt flesh, it hunts certainty, it hunts illusions, it hunts the lie that civilization has conquered nature. And in that hunt, it always wins. Nexu, Origins, the ambush predator of Cholgana. The Nexu, sleek and terrifying, is among the most feared predators of the galaxy, a creature that seems almost sculpted for death with its whip-like body, its rows of needle teeth, and its 4 watchful eyes, and to understand it one must journey to Cholgana, a shadowed jungle world where silence is deceptive and where the canopy hides predators that stalk with a patience born of countless generations of survival. Cholgana itself is a world of perpetual menace, its ecosystem a labyrinth of thick underbrush, towering trees, and endless shadows that conceal movement until it is too late. And it is here that the Nexu evolved, shaping itself into the ultimate ambush predator. Unlike the brute force of a Gundark, which overwhelms through strength and intimidation, the Nexu embodies elegance and precision, moving with the grace of a phantom and striking with such suddenness that prey often dies before realizing it has been attacked. Its body, long and agile, is designed for weaving through dense terrain, its razor-sharp claws finding purchase in bark, stone, and flesh alike, allowing it to climb, leap, and pounce from angles that defy expectation. Its tail, flexible and strong, acts as both balance and whip, capable of striking prey or steadying its movements in mid-leap, ensuring that every attack lands with surgical accuracy. Its 4 eyes, 2 positioned forward and 2 slightly higher on its head, granted overlapping fields of vision, including in the infrared spectrum, allowing it to see prey even in total darkness. This adaptation makes hiding from a Nexu nearly impossible, for it perceives heat as clearly as light, and no amount of foliage or shadow can conceal a creature from its gaze. The Nexu's infamous maw, filled with rows of needle-like teeth, completes its design as a nightmare predator. These teeth, slender and numerous, are not meant for chewing, but for tearing and shredding, allowing the Nexu to latch onto prey and rip through muscle with terrifying efficiency. When it clamps down, the teeth pierce deep, locking the victim in place, while the claws and tail finish the kill in a flurry of coordinated strikes. The Nexu's bite is not only lethal, but psychological, for survivors speak of the sensation of hundreds of punctures at once, as though their bodies were consumed by fire. Its raw, high-pitched, and almost shrieking is equally unnerving, a sound that echoes through the jungles of Cholgana and strikes terror into prey long before the predator itself appears. Yet the most disturbing aspect of the Nexu's hunting method is not its physical prowess, but its patience, for it will stalk prey for hours or even days, waiting until the victim is exhausted, distracted, or vulnerable, and then it strikes with precision so swift that the prey often never resists. This patience is not mere instinct, but calculated strategy, a reflection of its predatory intelligence. Zoologists who have studied Nexu from a distance remark on their almost playful cruelty, toying with prey, testing weaknesses, even feigning retreat to lure victims into false security before returning to kill with merciless efficiency. The people of Cholgana tell stories of Nexu that prowl at the edges of villages, their eyes glowing in the night like cold fire, watching silently, waiting for the moment when someone strays too far from the safety of the group. In these tales, the Nexu is not simply an animal, but a phantom, a reminder that the jungle itself hungers. For explorers who crash-landed on Cholgana, the Nexu was often the first and last predator they encountered, its presence ensuring that survival beyond a few days was almost impossible. Reports from starship logs recovered by salvage crews detail haunting accounts of survivors hearing shrieks in the night, of eyes reflecting in the foliage, of companions vanishing without a sound only to be found later, torn apart by claws and teeth. These accounts cemented the Nexu's place in galactic myth as the jungle's assassin, the unseen killer that strikes when least expected. It is little wonder then that when the Geonosians sought to fill their gladiatorial arenas with terrifying beasts, they chose the Nexu, for its savagery was matched only by its elegance, and audiences across the galaxy shuddered as they watched it stalk Jedi and slaves alike in pits designed to amplify fear. The origins of the Nexu on Cholgana reflect a philosophy of nature different from that of the Gundark. Where the Gundark is strength incarnate, the Nexu is cunning made flesh, its every adaptation designed not for brute force but for control of perception, for mastery of shadow, for dominance over the unseen. It reveals that fear does not always roar in the open, but sometimes whispers in the silence before the strike. That terror can be born not only from what is seen, but from what is felt but cannot be proven. To know that a Nexu is watching is to experience dread in its purest form, for its patience ensures that the longer it waits, the more prey unravels in fear. In this way, the Nexu is not only a predator, but a philosopher of death, a creature that teaches the lesson that vigilance is meaningless if one cannot escape inevitability. Its evolution shows us that power is not always about size or strength, but about precision, cunning, and patience, and in that it embodies a different facet of the dark side of nature. Where Gundarks terrify through brute inevitability, the Nexu terrifies through inevitability concealed until the last heartbeat. To reflect on the Nexu is to reflect on the kind of fear that lingers in the imagination long after the danger is gone, the kind of fear that haunts the mind with possibilities, the unseen predator that might still be watching, still waiting. It is no coincidence that smugglers whisper of Nexu as curses, that soldiers compare them to assassins, that cultures across the galaxy invoke them in their stories of caution and terror. The Nexu reminds the galaxy that shadows are never empty, that silence is never safe, that the eyes that glitter in the night may be closer than one thinks. Its origins on Cholgana reveal not only the predator itself, but the truth that fear is most powerful when it is unseen, when it strikes without warning, when it whispers in the mind long before claws and teeth ever touch flesh. The Nexu is thus more than an animal. It is the embodiment of the galaxy's fear of the unseen, a symbol that no matter how far sentients travel among the stars, they can never escape the primal truth that the jungle, the shadow, the predator, and the fear will always follow. Nexu, weapons of cunning, claws, quills, eyes, and the shriek of terror. The Nexu is a predator whose very body is an arsenal of terror, For unlike creatures that rely on singular strengths such as brute force or venom, the Nexu is designed to overwhelm prey through a combination of senses, speed, and savage natural weaponry, each adaptation complementing the other until the whole becomes something more than animal, a nightmare given flesh. Its claws are among its most iconic weapons, long, curved, and razor-sharp, retractable yet always glinting faintly with menace, and they serve not only as tools of death, but as instruments of control. For a Nexu does not simply strike once and retreat, but clings to its prey, raking and tearing in a frenzy of precision slashes until flesh and armor alike are shredded. These claws can puncture the hide of beasts many times the Nexu's size, and in arenas they have torn through the metal plates of gladiatorial armor as if they were cloth. They are not mindless swipes, but deliberate strikes, calculated to hamstring, to cripple, to ensure prey cannot flee, for the Nexu prefers its victims helpless, their terror extended by the knowledge that escape is impossible. To complement these claws is the whip-like tail, bristling with quills that bristle when the creature is agitated. These quills, hardened and sharp, can rake against opponents in close combat, adding a secondary set of weapons to an already formidable attack pattern. The tail itself is strong enough to act as a blunt instrument, knocking prey off balance or slamming into those who believe they have evaded its jaws and claws, and in this way the Nexu's body is a storm of strikes from all directions, a whirlwind of predation that few beings can resist for long. Perhaps the most disturbing of the Nexu's adaptations lies in its eyes, four orbs of cold precision that pierce shadow, foliage, and even darkness itself. Two are set forward, granting it the depth perception needed for leaping ambushes, while the other two, slightly higher, expand its field of view and allow it to perceive subtle movements from angles prey would consider safe. These four eyes together grant it an almost supernatural ability to track prey, and more terrifying still, they see in the infrared spectrum, detecting the heat signatures of bodies hidden in shadows or attempting to mask themselves. A being who believes themselves safe beneath jungle canopy, cloaked in darkness, finds that the Nexu's gaze follows them regardless, unblinking, unyielding, inevitable. Hunters who faced Nexu and lived long enough to recount the encounter often describe the moment when they felt its four eyes upon them, a sensation like being stripped of all concealment, as though every trick, every hiding place, every weapon meant nothing in the presence of a predator that saw not their surface, but their very life heat pulsing within. In those moments, prey knows the futility of escape, for the jungle itself offers no cover when the predator's vision pierces everything. To complement this terrifying arsenal is the Nexu's shriek, a piercing, high-pitched roar that is unlike the bellow of a Gundark or the thunderous growl of a Rancor. The Nexu's cry is not a declaration of dominance, but a psychological weapon, a sound that cuts into the mind, disorienting prey, freezing them in place long enough for the beast to pounce. Survivors describe it as a sound that seems to vibrate within the bones, an unnatural keening that rips through foliage and reverberates across jungle valleys, often followed by silence more terrible than the noise itself. For the silence means the Nexu has vanished from sight and is already moving into position. In gladiatorial arenas, this shriek silenced crowds, chilling even spectators who were safely behind shields and barriers, for it was a sound that carried something primal, something that awakened ancestral fear in every species, a reminder of the vulnerability buried deep within. The Nexu uses this shriek strategically, sometimes to flush prey from cover, sometimes to break the nerve of opponents before it strikes, and sometimes as a simple declaration that the hunt has ended and the kill has begun. Combined, these weapons make the Nexu a predator without equal in its environment, for each adaptation serves not only as a tool of death, but as an amplifier of terror. The claws tear, the quills rake, the tail lashes, the eyes pierce shadow, and the shriek freezes the soul, creating a symphony of predation in which fear is as much a weapon as teeth and claws. In this, the Nexu embodies a lesson about the nature of power. That power is not only about what one can destroy, but about how thoroughly one can unnerve, disorient, and dominate before the final strike. It is this combination of physical ferocity and psychological terror that, has given the Nexu its place among the most feared creatures in the galaxy, for to face one is not only to risk death, but to endure the collapse of courage itself. The Nexu is a reminder that some predators hunt not only bodies but minds, and that fear, once sown, can be as deadly as claws tearing into flesh. In its weapons, we see the perfection of an ambush predator, a design so complete that it borders on the mythic, a beast that kills not simply to feed, but to remind the galaxy that shadows are never safe, that silence is never empty, and that terror itself can take the form of a sleek body with four cold eyes glowing in the night. Nexu, gladiatorial arenas and the galaxy's fascination with monsters. The Nexu's reputation as one of the galaxy's most dangerous predators ensured that it would never remain confined to the jungles of Cholgana, for wherever the powerful and cruel sought spectacle, wherever civilizations hungered to see the struggle of life and death condensed into the blood-soaked sands of an arena, the Nexu was brought forth as the embodiment of terror, a living weapon to thrill audiences and to remind them that beyond the walls of their cities and palaces, the galaxy remained untamed. The Geonosians were among the first to recognize its potential as an arena beast, importing them to the great Petranaki arena, where they unleashed them against prisoners, slaves, and even Jedi. And in these spectacles, the Nexu's speed, elegance, and savagery became legend. Unlike the lumbering Acklay or the brute Rancor, whose spectacle was in their size and overwhelming strength, the Nexu terrified through grace, weaving between opponents with feline agility, striking from angles too swift to counter, its shriek echoing across the arena and silencing even the most raucous crowds. When Padme Amidala was cast into the Geonosian arena, chained and unarmed, it was the Nexu that pounced upon her, its four eyes gleaming in the torchlight, its claws slashing with such ferocity that the crowd gasped. And though she survived by wit and determination, that encounter cemented the Nexu's reputation across the galaxy as a creature even the bravest feared to face. The fascination with Nexu in arenas was not merely the bloodlust of crowds, but the deeper thrill of witnessing the untamed unleashed in the heart of civilization. For to see a Nexu in motion was to confront the raw truth of nature in a controlled environment, to be both horrified and safe, to stare at death behind shields and walls and feel a primal exhilaration. Senators, nobles, and warlords alike paid vast sums to watch them imported into private arenas, often pitting them against champions clad in elaborate armor, believing that such contests elevated the glory of the fighters. Yet time and again, the Nexu shattered these illusions, tearing through armor, cutting down warriors, and demonstrating that no matter how advanced civilization became, no matter how proud warriors were of their training and weapons, the wild still triumphed. Crowds screamed not only in delight but in terror, for though they were safe, the spectacle reminded them of their own fragility, that they too could be prey if stripped of their walls, their weapons, and their illusions. The Nexu's presence in arenas thus became more than entertainment. It became ritual, a reenactment of civilization's eternal struggle against the wild, and one in which the wild often triumphed. The galaxy's fascination with monsters like the Nexu reveals something about sentient beings themselves, for in watching them fight, in watching them kill, audiences were not only entertained, but confronted with the shadow of their own desires and fears. Monsters in arenas served as both catharsis and caution, a reminder that strength without control is terrifying, but also a secret admiration of that same strength. The Nexu, sleek and deadly, became a projection of the passions beings suppressed in daily life. The anger, the hunger, the desire to dominate, and to see it unleashed was to live those passions vicariously, to indulge in the fantasy of abandoning restraint and embracing the raw truth of survival. At the same time, to see heroes or champions defeat the Nexu offered reassurance that civilization could triumph over chaos, that order could conquer the wild, that sentience could rise above their animal origins. This duality, the thrill of the predator and the relief of its defeat, made the Nexu the perfect arena monster, a creature that terrified, fascinated, and symbolized all at once. Even outside of official arenas, the black markets of the galaxy thrived on capturing and selling Nexu to crime lords who kept them as trophies or weapons. Some installed them as guardians in their palaces, releasing them against intruders or even guests who displeased them, while others kept them in cages, parading them before rivals as demonstrations of power. Yet in every case, the Nexu remained untamable, for though they could be chained and contained, their ferocity could never be softened, and many crime lords who thought they had mastered their pets were torn apart when the inevitable escape came. These incidents only added to the Nexu's legend, reinforcing the idea that they were not simply beasts, but forces of nature, creatures whose essence could not be owned or subdued. Hunters who captured them often paid with their lives, and even when they succeeded, they admitted that the act of capturing a Nexu was less triumph than accident, for the beast always fought with a will to survive so absolute that even durasteel cages seemed inadequate. In the galactic imagination then, the Nexu became more than an animal. It became a symbol of civilization's fragile dominance over chaos, a reminder that for all the fleets, armies, and Jedi, there existed creatures who could remind them of their origins, who could strip away illusions with a roar and a slash. Its place in gladiatorial arenas immortalized it as one of the galaxy's great monsters, spoken of in the same breath as the Rancor and the Acklay, yet distinguished by its elegance, by the way it combined beauty and terror into one form. Audiences remembered not only its claws and teeth, but the way it moved, the way it seemed to glide through the air, the way its four eyes glowed with unyielding hunger. It was terrifying, but it was also mesmerizing, and in that tension lay the true reason it endured in legend. The galaxy's fascination with monsters is not only fascination with danger, but fascination with ourselves, with the parts of us that remain wild, unrestrained, and hungry. The Nexu, more than most, embodied that fascination, for it was not a hulking brute, but a sleek assassin, not mindless violence, but calculated death, and in it, audiences saw both the predator they feared and the predator they secretly admired. Nexu, Reflections. The predator in the shadows. To reflect on the Nexu is to reflect on the very nature of fear and predation, for in this creature we see not only the terror of claws, teeth, and eyes, but the embodiment of a truth that civilization struggles to ignore, that danger often comes not from what is seen, but from what is hidden, that the shadows are never empty, that silence is never safe, and that the predator always watches long before it strikes. The Nexu is not the brute inevitability of a Gundark roaring down canyons with overwhelming strength, nor the towering spectacle of a Rancor whose size alone crushes hope. It is something more insidious, more elegant, more intimate in its terror, for it teaches that death does not always announce itself, that it can creep silently through leaves, cling invisibly to branches, stalk for hours, days, weeks, waiting for the exact heartbeat when prey's vigilance wanes. In the Nexu, nature reveals the philosophy of patience turned into a weapon, the art of letting fear do most of the work. And in this revelation we glimpse the unsettling truth that sometimes the greatest power lies not in force but in silence, not in striking often but in striking perfectly once. The four eyes of the Nexu, glimmering faintly in the darkness, pierce not only shadows but the mind. For to know that one is watched but not see by whom is to experience a kind of terror deeper than immediate threat. It is the terror of inevitability. When prey feels its gaze, when it hears the faint rustle in the underbrush, when it freezes at the shriek that tears the night sky, the battle is already lost because fear has broken the will long before claws find flesh. This is why the Nexu occupies such a powerful place in galactic imagination, why it appears in proverbs, curses, and legends, for it embodies a universal lesson that vigilance is fragile and fear is eternal. Smugglers whisper of Nexu to warn each other not of literal beasts in spaceports, but of unseen dangers lurking in every deal, every betrayal. Soldiers compare ambushes and assassins to Nexu strikes because the metaphor resonates with the experience of being caught unprepared by something one cannot counter. even Jedi, who pride themselves on serenity and foresight, admit that the Nexu reveals the limits of the Force, for precognition may warn of danger, but when danger is everywhere and always watching, when the hunter is patient enough to weigh out the prey's vigilance, even foresight frays. The Nexu, then, is more than predator, it is philosophy given form, the lesson that no matter how strong, how wise, how armed, there will always exist threats that cannot be anticipated, that cannot be avoided, only endured or survived. And this truth unsettles because it undermines the illusion of control that sentients so desperately cling to. To meditate on the Nexu is to meditate on shadows themselves. Shadows comfort because they hide, because they offer concealment, yet they also terrify because they may conceal what watches back. The Nexu thrives in this paradox, weaponizing the fear of the unseen. It does not need to kill immediately because it understands instinctively that fear weakens prey, that the imagination will supply horrors greater than reality, that anticipation of pain can be more destructive than pain itself. This psychological warfare is what makes the Nexu not just an animal, but an echo of the Sith. For in its patience and cunning, it mirrors the way the Sith manipulate, the way they wait in shadows, the way they strike only when fear and despair have softened their enemies. The Jedi Code speaks of serenity and vigilance, but the Nexu demonstrates that serenity can be shattered by a single shriek, and vigilance cannot be sustained forever. Thus, it becomes a lesson not only about predators, but about life itself, that there will always be dangers one cannot see, and that no being, no matter how strong, can remain alert forever. And yet, alongside fear, the Nexu also awakens fascination, for it is beautiful in its deadliness, graceful in its lethality, elegant in its efficiency. To watch it move is to witness the perfection of predation, the art of a body honed to hunt, of senses sharpened to penetrate deception, of instincts tuned to the rhythm of survival. It is terrifying, yes, but also mesmerizing, and in that duality lies another truth, that fear and fascination are intertwined, that beings are drawn to the very things that threaten them. This is why the Nexu filled arenas with screams and silence, why nobles imported them at obscene costs, why tales of their hunts spread across star systems. They are not only reminders of terror, but reflections of desire, for in their unrestrained ferocity, beings glimpse the wild freedom they have lost, the raw passion they have, buried beneath civilization. To be Nexu, even for a moment, is to be unchained, and that fantasy seduces even as it horrifies. Ultimately, the Nexu reveals that fear is not only an emotion, but a tool, not only a response, but a strategy. And in this it becomes more than an animal. It becomes a meditation on power itself. Power is not only the ability to strike, but the ability to make others believe striking is inevitable, to control their choices, their thoughts, their courage long before battle begins. The Nexu controls not only through claws and teeth, but through the knowledge of its presence, the inevitability of its strike, the dread it inspires before it even moves. That is why it endures in myth and memory, why it is spoken of across the galaxy not merely as a predator of Cholgana, but as a universal symbol of the unseen, the inevitable, the shadow that cannot be escaped. The Nexu teaches that terror does not roar in the open, but whispers in the dark, that sometimes the greatest predator is not the one who strikes first, but the one who waits until fear itself has already won. And in that lesson, the galaxy remembers why the Nexu is not simply dangerous, but unforgettable, not only feared, but revered as one of the purest embodiments of predation in all of Star Wars. Rathtars, origins, the galaxy's most notorious abominations. To speak of the Rathtar is to speak of abominations born not of elegance like the Nexu, or brute balance like the Gundark, but of chaos given flesh, a tangle of tentacles, teeth, and hunger that seems almost unnatural in its existence, as if nature itself recoiled when shaping it, yet allowed it to persist as a cruel joke upon the galaxy. The origins of these monstrous predators lie in the shadows of Tuon Kayti. a world already whispered about in caution, a place whose dense jungles and dark oceans hid terrors unknown, and it was there that Rathtars first slithered into the nightmares of explorers and colonists. They are believed to have evolved as apex ambush predators, thriving in environments where shadows and silence allowed them to coil unseen until prey wandered too close. But over time, their species became less a balance of predator and prey and more a scourge. For Rathtars do not hunt for sustenance alone, but for carnage, consuming anything in their path with a hunger that seems bottomless. To look upon one is to see a grotesque mass of muscle and sinew crowned with a maw lined with rings of jagged teeth, a mouth so wide and powerful that armored prey, even vehicles, can be torn apart with horrifying ease. From this central body sprout long, muscular tentacles, each ending in claws or suction pads, allowing the creature to lash out in all directions at once, ensnaring multiple victims, dragging them screaming into its gaping maw. Unlike the precise elegance of the Nexu, whose patience and vision turn hunts into art, the Rathtar overwhelms by sheer chaos, striking with such speed and unpredictability that prey has no time to react, no chance to resist, caught in a storm of thrashing limbs and gnashing teeth. The earliest recorded encounters with Rathtars ended in slaughter. Colonists who attempted to settle on Twonkati vanished, their camps discovered torn apart, their corpses shredded beyond recognition. Expeditions sent to study them returned with few survivors, most too traumatized to speak coherently. Their reports filled with screams about tentacles from every direction, about comrades dragged into the dark, about entire squads annihilated in seconds. These accounts spread like wildfire across the galaxy, and the Rathtar quickly earned its place as one of the most dangerous creatures catalogued by the Republic. But it was not only their lethality that terrified, it was their ability to spread. For Rathtars, once introduced to new ecosystems, rarely remained contained. They reproduce quickly, adapt swiftly, and dominate any environment they infest, turning thriving regions into death zones. Worlds that accidentally became host to Rathtars often saw entire populations evacuate, for once they take root, eradication is almost impossible without coordinated military strikes. Their hunger is insatiable, their resilience remarkable, and their numbers grow faster than hunters can cull them until ecosystems collapse under their weight and entire regions of space become marked with the warning, avoid at all costs. In many ways, Rathtars feel less like products of natural evolution and more like weapons of nature, designed to spread terror wherever they go. It is for this reason that smugglers and crime syndicates, ever eager to exploit fear, began capturing and transporting them for gladiatorial arenas, private collections, or intimidation. Yet almost every attempt at containment ended in catastrophe. Entire ships were lost when Rathtars escaped their enclosures, tearing through crew and cargo indiscriminately, leaving derelicts adrift in space, echoing with the silence of their victims. One of the most infamous events, known as the Trillia Massacre, saw dozens of lives ended in moments when a group of Rathtars, smuggled illegally across the galaxy, broke free and slaughtered everything in their path. This massacre cemented their reputation not only as predators but as disasters waiting to happen, living catastrophes whose very presence threatened the stability of space lanes and trade routes. Even centuries later, smugglers whispered of the curse of transporting Rathtars, and yet greed ensured their trade never ceased. Each transaction gambling with lives, each transport flirting with annihilation. Rathtars terrify not only because of their physical threat, but because they embody a philosophy of hunger unbound. They do not kill to eat alone, but to consume, to destroy, to erase life wherever they find it. Unlike the Gundark, which kills to dominate, or the Nexu, which kills to sustain, the Rathtar kills because killing seems to be its very nature. In this way, they embody the galaxy's deepest fear, that some things exist not for balance, not for survival, not for reason, but only to consume, only to destroy, only to end. They are not metaphors for power or cunning, but for chaos itself, a chaos that civilization cannot reason with, cannot contain, cannot defeat without fire and blood. To face one is to face inevitability, not the inevitability of a single predator, but of a swarm. For where there is one Rathtar, there will be more, and where they are allowed to thrive, no life remains. This is why their legend spreads in whispers and warnings, why even hardened soldiers speak of them with trembling voices, why Jedi themselves recorded them as abominations of nature, reminders that not every shadow conceals elegance, not every predator embodies balance. Some are born only to end. Rathtars, anatomy and hunting methods, chaos in motion. To study the anatomy of a Rathtar is to confront the unsettling reality of a predator so alien, so grotesquely effective that it defies the comforting logic of nature as we know it. For every element of its form is shaped not to coexist with an ecosystem, but to dominate and consume it until nothing remains. And in its presence, one understands why entire expeditions vanish without trace, why worlds fall silent after infestation, why even the most arrogant hunters recoil at its name. At the heart of the Rathtar lies its maw, a gaping ring of jagged teeth that spirals inward like the jaws of some cosmic grinder, each tooth serrated to latch, tear, and shred flesh, armor, and bone with equal ease. And once prey is caught within that circle of death, there is no escape, for the teeth do not only pierce, but interlock, creating a living trap that clamps tighter the more the victim struggles. Surrounding this nightmare mouth is a muscular body, spherical in appearance, but pulsating with sinew and tension, capable of absorbing blaster fire and regenerating from wounds that would fell lesser beasts, a body that moves with unsettling speed despite its bulk, rolling, slithering, and lunging in ways that seem impossible for its size. From this central mass erupt its most iconic and horrifying features, its tentacles, long, muscular, and armed with barbed tips or suction pads, each tentacle capable of independent movement, whipping outward to grasp prey from multiple angles, entangling them, crushing them, dragging them inexorably toward the endless hunger of its maw. Unlike the claws of the Gundark or the elegant pounce of the Nexu, a Rathtar's tentacles overwhelm through multiplicity, striking simultaneously, creating a storm of limbs that envelop prey in chaos, leaving victims with no direction to flee, no space to counterattack, only the frantic struggle against coils that tighten with each heartbeat. What makes the Rathtar more terrifying still is the coordination of these limbs, for though chaotic in appearance, they move with eerie precision, striking weak points, seizing weapons, even swatting aside blaster fire in the frenzy of attack. Observers who survived encounters reported that the tentacles seemed almost intelligent, reacting to threats faster than the eye could follow, anticipating the movements of prey as though the creature could read intent through body language alone. This coordination is matched by astonishing strength, for a single tentacle can wrap around a full-grown Wookiee and snap bones with a single constriction, while larger Rathtars have been known to seize speeders, pulling them from the air and crushing them into twisted metal. In close quarters, their hunting method is simple but devastating. Lash out with multiple tentacles, drag prey inward, and consume. In open terrain, their strategy becomes more insidious, for they coil into shadows, waiting in silence, using their tentacles as nets, spreading them wide to form barriers or traps, then collapsing inward once prey blunders into their range. The suddenness of the strike, combined with the multiplicity of limbs, creates an impression of inevitability, as though death descends from every direction at once, and indeed, few beings escape once the tentacles have begun their relentless assault. The sensory adaptations of the Rathtar complement this anatomy, making them hunters not only of flesh, but of fear. Their skin is lined with sensitive receptors capable of detecting vibrations across wide distances, allowing them to sense footsteps, heartbeats, even the faint rustle of breath in foliage or metallic echo in corridors. This makes them equally lethal in their native jungles and in artificial environments such as ships or outposts, for the vibration of bulkheads and the hum of engines become signals to track rather than obstacles to overcome. Combined with rudimentary but effective eyesight and an uncanny sensitivity to life's presence, Rathtars are drawn to movement, to fear, to the heat of bodies, and once their attention is fixed, they pursue with horrifying persistence. Unlike the patient Nexu, which stalks for hours, the Rathtars method is blitzkrieg, a sudden eruption of limbs and teeth that seeks to overwhelm prey before it can resist. Yet this apparent frenzy masks the fact that Rathtars do not attack blindly. Their strikes are coordinated, their tentacles target multiple foes, and their movement is calculated to sow panic, for they seem to understand instinctively that fear paralyzes more effectively than claws. Hunters who attempted to trap Rathtars learned quickly that conventional methods fail, for nets are torn apart by tentacles, tranquilizers are shrugged off by their resilient biology, and even cages built from reinforced. Durasteel often collapse when the creature thrashes in rage. Those few specimens captured alive became nightmares for their captors, breaking containment with horrifying regularity, reducing crews to corpses within minutes. It is said that to transport a Rathtar safely requires not only the strongest cages, but constant vigilance, for the creature's intelligence extends to testing its bonds, striking at weaknesses, waiting until its captors grow complacent before exploding into violence. Smugglers whisper that to share a ship with a Rathtar is to live in constant dread, for every creak of metal might signal its escape, every shadow in the cargo hold might conceal a tentacle waiting to strike. The Trillia massacre stands as the most infamous example of this danger, when smugglers transporting multiple Rathtars failed to contain them, unleashing a slaughter that left entire corridors drenched in blood, bodies scattered and unrecognizable, the survivors broken in mind as well as body. The hunting methods of the Rathtar thus combine anatomy, instinct, and psychological terror into a force of nature that seems designed not for balance but for annihilation. Their tentacles overwhelm, their maw consumes, their resilience endures, and their presence spreads panic faster than blaster fire. They are nightmares because they embody chaos, because their attacks defy logic and order, because in their storm of limbs and teeth one sees not the calculated elegance of a predator, but the raw hunger of destruction itself. To encounter a Rathtar is to confront not only death, but the collapse of certainty, the unraveling of the belief that strength or weapons can guarantee survival. Their anatomy is not just a design of predation, but of domination, a grotesque form that teaches a single lesson, that some creatures exist not to live alongside life, but to devour it, not to maintain balance, but to consume until nothing remains. And in this truth, the Rathtar earns its place among the galaxy's most feared abominations, for it is not merely a predator, it is chaos incarnate, hunger without end, terror without reason, and once it has chosen you as prey, there is no escape. Rathtars, encounters, massacres, and legends of terror. The reputation of the Rathtar is not born of academic classification or sterile zoological notes, but of blood, screams, and the countless ships, settlements, and expeditions that vanished into silence after crossing their path. For it is in their encounters with the sentient galaxy that these creatures transformed from obscure nightmares of Twonkati into universal symbols of terror. Their names spoken in cantinas, whispered among smugglers, and etched in the memory of soldiers who survived them with scars upon both flesh and spirit. The most infamous of these encounters, the Trillia massacre, remains the clearest demonstration of their horror, when smugglers attempting to transport multiple Rathtars for sale underestimated their ferocity. Their containment cells failed, and within minutes the entire crew was torn apart in a frenzy of writhing tentacles and gnashing teeth, corridors painted with blood, weapons stripped from hands before they could be fired, victims dragged screaming into maws that silenced them forever. The scale of the slaughter was so complete that rescue teams arriving later reported that it seemed less like a transport ship and more like the aftermath of a battlefield where no side had survived, and the few who lived long enough to tell the story spoke in fragmented tones of chaos too swift to comprehend, of comrades vanishing in coils, of every direction filled with death. That massacre alone was enough to etch the Rathtar into galactic infamy, but it was far from the only event that spread their legend. On outlying colonies where explorers attempted to tame wild worlds, stories abound of Rathtars introduced accidentally through smuggling operations or biological trade, where within weeks entire settlements were emptied, survivors fleeing in panic, leaving behind broken homes and half-buried corpses, reminders that once Rathtars infest a region, no force short of orbital bombardment can guarantee eradication. Tales of Rathtars became cautionary legends among smugglers, for many ships vanished in the attempt to transport them, and the unlucky captains who survived long enough to be rescued often came away broken, their crews annihilated in minutes, their ships reduced to husks. Han Solo himself once carried them aboard the Eravana, and his survival is spoken of less as skill and more as luck, for even the most seasoned smuggler cannot control chaos when it strikes with tentacles from all sides. That infamous episode in which Rathtars escaped aboard his freighter further solidified their status as living catastrophes, creatures so feared that their very mention made hardened criminals pale. Even in gladiatorial arenas, where many creatures became spectacles, the Rathtar was rarely used, for while crowds thirsted for violence, Rathtars brought only slaughter, too swift, too overwhelming, too final to allow the slow tension audiences craved. On the few occasions they were released into arenas, the fights ended in minutes, the sand soaked with blood, the contestants torn apart before they could even draw weapons, and the creature rampaging uncontrollably until security forces incinerated it, leaving audiences shaken and silent. Their thrill replaced with the sobering realization that they had glimpsed something that did not belong within the walls of civilization. Legends of Rathtars often exaggerated their scale, claiming they grew larger than starships, that they could devour entire squads in a single strike, that they reproduced so fast they could overrun planets in days. And while such tales stretched truth into myth, the kernel of reality within them ensured their power as warnings. Parents told their children stories of Rathtars to scare them from wandering into forests or caves. Smugglers invoked their name as curses. Soldiers whispered of them when deployed to worlds with unknown predators. And cultists, fascinated by destruction, revered them as avatars of chaos, symbols of hunger without end. In the darker corners of the galaxy, Rathtars became something close to legend, their images painted on walls, their names used in rituals meant to summon fear, their presence elevated beyond biology into myth. Yet unlike many myths, theirs required no invention, for the scars they left upon survivors and the wreckage they left upon space lanes provided all the proof needed. Each massacre, each disappearance, each survivor's broken testimony added another thread to their legend, weaving them into the galaxy's cultural memory as one of the purest embodiments of terror. The Jedi too recorded encounters with Rathtars, though reluctantly, for they understood that these creatures represented a danger even their training could not always counter. Jedi archives note missions where knights and padawans were dispatched to cleanse infestations, and while some succeeded, others were overwhelmed, their lightsabers flashing briefly before vanishing beneath a storm of tentacles. Jedi Masters cautioned their students not to underestimate beasts such as these, for the Rathtar revealed the truth that the Force may grant clarity but cannot guarantee victory against chaos so overwhelming. In one account, a Padawan described the fear of hearing metal bulkheads groan as Rathtars tore through walls to reach them, their presence filling the Force with a turbulence so violent it drowned concentration. Such encounters reinforced the Jedi teaching that not every threat is sentient, not every battle is philosophical, and that sometimes survival itself is the only victory. The legends of Rathtars endure because they represent more than just physical danger. They represent the collapse of order, the triumph of chaos, the inevitability of destruction. When smugglers whisper of them, when parents warn their children, when hunters tell tales in cantinas, the Rathtar becomes more than a creature of Tuon Keti. It becomes a reminder that the galaxy is vast, that not all its shadows are mapped, and that there exist horrors which cannot be reasoned with or tamed. Their massacres echo in memory because they are swift and absolute, because they reduce order to ruin in minutes, because they prove that for all the fleets, armies, and philosophies, there will always exist beings that embody only hunger, only death, only the void. And in that truth lies their enduring terror. For the Rathtar teaches that chaos is not a storm that passes, but a presence that waits, always ready to uncoil its tentacles and remind the galaxy that life is fragile, order is fleeting, and destruction is always only one mistake away. Rathtars, reflections, the symbol of chaos and hunger. To reflect on the Rathtar is to confront the most disturbing truths of existence, for while the Gundark embodies raw strength and the Nexu embodies precision and cunning, the Rathtar represents something far more terrifying, something that transcends even the natural order of predator and prey. It represents chaos, hunger, and the collapse of control, a living storm of tentacles and teeth that symbolizes not only the fragility of life, but the inevitability of destruction when order fails. The galaxy has always been built upon the illusion that with enough ships, enough armies, enough codes of law, chaos can be held at bay. Yet the Rathtar tears through that illusion as effortlessly as it tears through steel bulkheads, reminding all who encounter it that some forces cannot be contained, that some hungers cannot be reasoned with, that some terrors exist only to consume. Unlike the Gundark, which dominates its environment with strength, or the Nexu, which thrives on patience and stealth, the Rathtar offers no balance, no artistry, no strategy beyond overwhelming annihilation. It is hunger incarnate, a predator that does not merely feed but erases, whose very presence transforms thriving ecosystems into graveyards and bustling ships into floating tombs. In this, it becomes a metaphor not only for the dangers of the wild, but for the dangers of unrestrained power, for it teaches that hunger without limit, ambition without restraint, desire without conscience will always devour until nothing remains. Civilizations across the galaxy fear Rathtars, not only because of their bodies and their massacres, but because of what they represent, the uncontrollable. Smugglers who trade them know that transporting a Rathtar is less a job and more a gamble with fate, a test of hubris that often ends in blood. Soldiers who face them know that discipline, formation, and strategy collapse when confronted with chaos so absolute that no tactic can compensate. Even the Jedi, who preach serenity and mastery of fear, acknowledge in their archives that the presence of Rathtars in the Force is turbulent, overwhelming, difficult to navigate, as though the creatures themselves embody disorder at the deepest level. And in this recognition lies their symbolic weight, for they show that not every terror in the galaxy can be mastered, not every threat can be predicted, and not every shadow can be illuminated. They remind us that control is fragile, that safety is fleeting, that all the codes and philosophies of the galaxy can be undone in an instant by a presence that exists only to unravel. The Rathtar also symbolizes the danger of greed, for almost every story of their spread begins not with their natural range, but with sentience attempting to capture, transport, and exploit them. Crime lords sought to parade them as trophies, smugglers sought to profit from their sale, arena masters sought to thrill audiences with their carnage, and in every case the attempt ended in catastrophe. The Rathtar cannot be tamed, cannot be owned, cannot be forced into service without cost, and this truth reflects a broader theme within the galaxy, that those who believe they can control chaos often become its first victims. In this way, Rathtars are as much mirrors of hubris as they are monsters, exposing the arrogance of beings who think themselves above the wild, above hunger, above destruction, only to be reminded that they are prey like all others when the storm of tentacles descends. To meditate on the Rathtar, then, is to meditate on the cost of arrogance, on the inevitability of ruin when beings seek to exploit forces beyond their control, and on the truth that some dangers exist not to be mastered, but to remind us of the boundaries of mastery itself. There is also a strange poetry in the way Rathtars inspire not only terror but fascination. Their chaotic form, their grotesque anatomy, their overwhelming hunger strike horror, yet stories of them circulate endlessly, passed along in cantinas and war councils, their name invoked in curses and legends alike. Why do beings repeat the stories of their massacres, their escapes, their devastations? Because in the Rathtar, they glimpse something primal and undeniable, the chaos that lurks within all life, the hunger that drives survival, the destructive capacity that lies dormant in every species. They are not alien in the sense of incomprehensible. They are alien because they exaggerate the truths we already know. Just as sentient beings hunger for power, for control, for dominance, so too does the Rathtar hunger, but without conscience, without end, without illusion. And that is why they haunt the imagination, because they strip away the masks civilization wears and show hunger in its purest, most terrifying form. In reflecting on the Rathtar, one sees not only a beast, but a meditation on the fragility of order and the inevitability of chaos. They remind us that the galaxy, vast and ancient, will always harbor forces that cannot be charted, that cannot be reasoned with, that will always rise to shatter the illusions of permanence and safety. They are a lesson carved in flesh and blood, that some hungers are endless, that some shadows cannot be dispelled, that chaos is not a passing storm, but an eternal truth that waits at the edge of every star system, at the edge of every civilization, at the edge of every being's soul. The Rathtar is more than predator. It is a symbol of the uncontrollable, the embodiment of hunger without end, and in remembering it, the galaxy remembers its own fragility, its own arrogance, and its own inevitable dance with the chaos that can never be caged. Rancors. Origins and evolution of the galaxy's most iconic beasts. The Rancor stands as one of the most recognizable monsters in all of galactic memory, a towering titan of muscle, claws, and hunger, whose image has transcended its natural environment to become a symbol of primal brutality and enslavement. For to understand the Rancor is to step back into the swamps of Dathomir, its most infamous homeworld, and trace the lineage of a species that has endured for millennia by balancing savagery with surprising adaptability. Rancors are believed to have originated on the outer rim world of Dathomir, though some scholars speculate that their roots may stretch back even farther, with evidence suggesting that they were once distributed across multiple systems by ancient spacefaring civilizations who captured and transplanted them as exotic war beasts. Whether they were seeded across the stars by conquest or evolved solely upon Dathomir's hostile terrain, the Rancor embodies survival in its purest form, shaped by a world of swamps, forests, and jagged terrain where only the strongest endured. Towering over 6 to 10 meters in height, with skin like armor and claws that can rip apart speeders, they are apex predators who dominate every environment they are placed in. Yet what makes their story remarkable is not merely their size or ferocity, but the way in which sentient civilizations have sought to enslave and repurpose them, reshaping their legend from beasts of nature into symbols of fear, dominance, and spectacle. On Dathomir, the Rancors became more than wild predators. They became entwined with the culture of the Night Sisters, the witches who tamed and rode them into battle, binding them through the Force and turning their savagery into extensions of their will. This bond between witch and beast elevated the Rancor beyond mere predator, making it a creature of myth and ritual, feared not only for its claws and jaws but for the way it became a living weapon of dark sorcery. To see a Night Sister astride a Rancor was to see nature and magic intertwined in a vision of terror, a reminder that even the wildest beast can be bent when power demands it. Yet not all Rancors were enslaved. In the wilds of Dathomir, they remained lords of the swamp, hunting creatures of massive size, roaming territories that stretched for kilometers, and defending their domains with roars that shook the canopy. They are not mindless brutes, as many assume, but creatures of surprising intelligence and even loyalty when raised in captivity, capable of forming bonds with caretakers, as evidenced by the mournful cries of Jabba the Hutt's keeper when his Rancor was slain beneath the sands of Tatooine. Their intelligence does not rival that of sentient species, yet it grants them a kind of personality that has only deepened their place in myth, for they can be tamed, trained, even befriended, blurring the line between monster and companion. This complexity has only fueled their legend, for in them beings see not only the terror of a predator, but the possibility of loyalty, making their deaths tragic as well as terrifying. Indeed, the tale of Luke Skywalker's battle with Jabba's Rancor became one of the most retold stories in the galaxy, for it revealed the paradox of the creature, that even monsters can inspire sympathy, even beasts of terror can be mourned. The evolution of the Rancor across the galaxy reveals their adaptability, for once transplanted from Dathomir, they flourished in countless environments, from swamps to deserts to the underground pits of crime lords. Subspecies emerged, such as the towering bull rancors of Dathomir, or the pale cave-dwelling varieties that haunted subterranean tunnels, each shaped by environment, yet retaining the same defining traits of size, strength, and predatory instinct. Wherever they were placed, they became the dominant force, overwhelming native predators and securing their role as apex hunters. This adaptability made them desirable as war beasts and status symbols, and so they were captured, bred, and traded, spreading their terror across the galaxy. The Hutts, in particular, developed a fascination with them, using them as execution beasts, releasing captives into pits where the Rancor's towering silhouette would emerge from the shadows to devour them before cheering crowds. In these moments, the Rancor became not only predator, but performance, a theatrical embodiment of fear, its very existence turned into a spectacle of power. What makes the Rancor's evolution so striking is the way in which its natural form intersects with cultural myth. Unlike the Rathtar, which is pure chaos, or the Nexu, which is pure stealth, the Rancor is strength incarnate, and civilizations across the galaxy have shaped that strength into whatever symbol suited them. To the Night Sisters it was ritual and weapon, to the Hutts it was fear and entertainment, to the Republic it was a reminder of the dangers lurking in the Outer Rim, to smugglers it was a curse, to hunters it was a prize, and to the Jedi it was a challenge. In all these cases, the Rancor transcended its biology to become something greater, a cultural figure, a monster etched into the psyche of the galaxy, its roar echoing not only in swamps and pits, but in memory, myth, and story. Its evolution is thus not only physical, but symbolic, for it has evolved from predator to icon, from beast to legend. To reflect on the origins of the Rancor is to reflect on the way the galaxy transforms its creatures into mirrors of its own fears and desires, and in this mirror we see both the raw power of nature and the endless hunger of civilization to control and reshape that power. The Rancor endures because it is both, because it is monster and companion, predator and slave, terror and tragedy, and in that duality it becomes one of the most enduring icons of danger the galaxy has ever known. Rancors, anatomy of terror, claws, hide, jaws, and the mind within. The anatomy of the Rancor is a living testament to nature's design for domination, for every feature of its towering frame, from its hulking claws to its armored hide, from its cavernous jaws to the unexpected glimmers of intelligence in its reptilian eyes, speaks of a predator whose form is a balance between savagery and survival, a balance so effective that it has allowed the species to thrive not only on Dathomir, but on any world reckless enough to host them. Standing between 6 and 10 meters in height, their massive bodies are draped in leathery skin that resembles armor plating, thick folds of hide that can absorb blaster fire and resist blades, making them difficult to wound and even harder to kill. This hide is not merely protection, but a record of their lives, scarred and cracked with the marks of battles fought against other predators or rivals, each line a testament to endurance, for a Rancor's very body carries the history of its survival. Their limbs are grotesquely elongated, with arms so massive they nearly drag upon the ground, ending in claws the length of vibroblades, each talon curved like a scythe, capable of tearing through stone, steel, and flesh flesh with equal ease. In combat, these claws are not clumsy but precise, slashing downward with enough force to crush a speeder into twisted wreckage, yet delicate enough to snatch up a single humanoid, lifting them wriggling into the air before dragging them to the cavernous maw that dominates the creature's skull. That maw is among the most iconic and terrifying features of the Rancor, a gaping mouth lined with jagged teeth as long as a sentient's forearm, each tooth serrated and sharpened through constant use. When the jaws close, they do so with the power of industrial presses, able to snap bones like twigs and pulverize armor with brutal efficiency. The sound of a Rancor feeding has been described in grim detail by survivors and chroniclers alike. A combination of crunching bone, tearing sinew, and guttural roars that reverberate in the chest of anyone unfortunate enough to hear it. But the Rancor's jaws are not simply weapons of destruction, they are symbols of inevitability, for once prey is seized in its claws, there is little hope of escaping the final descent into that endless maw. Even more terrifying is the speed with which the Rancor can deploy these jaws, lunging forward with surprising agility for a creature of its size, snapping down upon prey before they can flee or fire a second shot. Many who underestimated the creature's speed learned too late that size does not always mean slowness, that the Rancor's massive frame conceals a ferocity of motion rivaling predators half its size. The Rancor's musculature is equally remarkable, for beneath its leathery hide lies a network of muscle so dense that even limbs the size of starship hull plates move with frightening quickness. A single swipe of its clawed hand can send soldiers flying across a battlefield, while its legs, thick and gnarled, allow it to stomp through obstacles with crushing force. The sheer weight of its body, when brought down upon prey, can flatten them instantly, and yet the Rancor is not lumbering. It can pivot, leap, and surge forward with surprising dexterity. Tales of Rancors pursuing prey through swamps and canyons reveal their endurance as well, for these beasts can chase quarry for hours, their lungs and hearts built to sustain the kind of exertion that would kill lesser predators. Their senses complement this physical prowess, with nostrils flaring wide to pick up scent trails and eyes adapted to low light, allowing them to stalk in shadows with unsettling stealth for their size. To see such a massive form emerge from the darkness only when it chooses is to realize that the Rancor is not merely brute force, but a hunter whose adaptations combine concealment and savagery into one body. And yet perhaps the most surprising feature of the Rancor is not its claws or jaws or hide, but the flickers of intelligence that shine in its behavior, for unlike the mindless frenzy of a Rathtar or the instinctive cunning of a Nexu, the Rancor demonstrates an awareness that elevates it above mere beast. They can be trained, responding to handlers, following commands, and even forming attachments that suggest loyalty and recognition. Jabba's Rancor, whose death drew tears from its keeper, is perhaps the most famous example of this, revealing that beneath the monstrous exterior lay a creature capable of bond and memory. On Dathomir, the Night Sisters exploited this intelligence, binding Rancors through sorcery and force manipulation, using them as mounts and companions in war. These bonds, unnatural though they were, revealed the creature's capacity for cooperation, for loyalty, for existing as more than an engine of destruction. Hunters who captured Rancors and survived long enough to study them reported that they displayed territorial awareness, recognizing intruders from afar and responding differently to familiar caretakers. They are not sentient, not philosophers or tacticians, but their minds are more complex than most predators, balancing savagery with the ability to learn, adapt, and connect. This intelligence deepens their terror, for it means that a Rancor's attacks are not purely instinctive, but can be deliberate, calculated, even patient. They do not always charge immediately, but sometimes stalk, waiting for prey to corner itself before striking. They test boundaries, prodding at cages, seeking weaknesses, remembering where food appears and how best to capture it. This memory and adaptability make them dangerous not only as predators, but as captives, for a Rancor that survives one attempt at containment or combat will rarely be fooled the same way again. It is this combination of brute power, devastating anatomy, and glimmers of intelligence that cements the Rancor as one of the galaxy's most iconic and feared beasts. For in its claws, hide, and jaws, it embodies inevitability, and in its eyes, small but gleaming, it embodies something more unsettling still: recognition, awareness, perhaps even a shadow of kinship. To face a Rancor, then, is to face not only death by crushing force, but to glimpse in its gaze the uncomfortable truth that even monsters can know loyalty, that even predators can mourn, and that terror is deepest when it carries with it the reflection of something we recognize within ourselves. Rancors, encounters, and legends, from pits to battlefields. The legend of the Rancor is woven not only from its anatomy and its origins, but from the encounters that etched its name into the galaxy's shared memory, for it is through stories of confrontation, survival, and death that the Rancor rose from a predator of Dathomir to one of the most iconic beasts in galactic history, remembered in cantinas, chronicles, and campfire whispers alike. Among the most famous of these encounters is the tale of Luke Skywalker and Jabba the Hutt's pet Rancor, a confrontation that played out beneath the sands of Tatooine in a dank stone pit designed not merely for execution but for spectacle. For Jabba did not simply wish to kill those who displeased him, but to humiliate and terrify them, to watch them flail helplessly as his beloved beast descended with claws outstretched and jaws gaping. When Luke was cast into that pit, unarmed but unafraid, the galaxy witnessed a battle that became myth almost overnight, for in it the Rancor's strength and terror were displayed for all to see as it charged, roared, and attempted to crush the young Jedi in its colossal grip. That Luke survived by wit and agility, turning the beast's size against it and finally crushing it beneath the weight of a gate, did not diminish the Rancor's legend but magnified it, for the tale reminded all who heard it that even the galaxy's greatest hero faced death in the form of a beast, and that his survival was not inevitable but earned. The aftermath of that death deepened the creature's place in memory, for the tears of its keeper, a simple man who loved it as a companion, revealed the complexity of the Rancor's existence, that it was not only monster but pet, not only executioner but friend, and its death was tragedy as well as triumph. Beyond Tatooine, the Rancor's legend was written in the swamps and battlefields of Dathomir, where the Night Sisters rode them into war, binding them with the Force and unleashing them against their enemies as living siege engines. To see a Rancor in battle under the command of a witch was to witness a vision torn from nightmare, a fusion of sorcery and savagery that made armies falter and flee. These Rancors did not simply kill, they tore through formations, shattered fortifications, and left behind fields littered with broken bodies, their roars echoing with the chants of their riders. Stories of these battles spread far beyond Dathomir, cementing the image of the Rancor as a beast not only of nature but of magic, feared as much for the witches who commanded them as for their own claws. Among the Night Sisters themselves, these creatures were revered, treated with ritual respect, integrated into their myths as sacred companions who embodied both the wildness of the swamp and the strength of their clan. The Rancor in this context became more than predator. It became symbol, a living icon of the bond between beast and witch, of the Night Sisters' mastery over forces the rest of the galaxy could not comprehend. Other encounters reinforced their legend across the Outer Rim, where crime lords, mercenaries, and gladiators imported them to serve as execution beasts or to fight in arenas. Though fewer in number than Nexu or Acklays, the Rancors that appeared in these spectacles were unforgettable, towering above gladiators and slaves, ripping them apart to the cheers of bloodthirsty crowds. Their size and power made them perfect for theatrical executions, for no other beast so effectively combined the inevitability of death with the thrill of spectacle. Crime families used them as instruments of fear, parading them before rivals, feeding them traitors, and ensuring that the legend of the Rancor grew with every scream and every mangled corpse. Tales of smugglers who stumbled into Rancor pens or bounty hunters forced to fight them for survival became staples of Outer Rim folklore, retold with embellishment, but always carrying the same theme, that to face a rancor was to face death made flesh, a death not cunning or patient, but immediate, overwhelming, and absolute. The Jedi too encountered rancors, both in wild hunts on Dathomir and in missions where they were forced to confront beasts used as weapons of war. Their records describe these encounters with clinical precision, yet laced with respect, noting the sheer difficulty of fighting a creature whose hide could resist blaster fire, whose claws could shatter stone, whose resilience made even lightsabers struggle to bring it down swiftly. Knights and Padawans alike learned that the Rancor demanded not only strength but strategy, for brute force alone rarely sufficed. Some Jedi sought to commune with them, sensing in their minds not malice but instinct, not cruelty but hunger, and a few succeeded in calming them, proving that even such beasts were not beyond the reach of the Force's harmony. Yet in battle, the Rancor remained a foe to be feared, and the memory of these clashes entered the Jedi archives as cautionary tales about the dangers of underestimating the wild. Through all these encounters, the Rancor's legend crystallized into something more than a predator's reputation. It became a cultural icon, a symbol of brute force and primal terror, but also of tragedy, loyalty, and complexity. The galaxy remembers it not only as a monster in pits and swamps, but as a creature that could be loved, ridden, mourned, and revered. Its roar became shorthand for unstoppable power, its silhouette a universal image of dread, its name invoked in curses and metaphors across countless worlds. And yet, unlike the Rathtar, which is chaos, or the Nexu, which is shadow, the Rancor's terror always carried a human face, for its keepers wept, its riders revered it, its enemies survived it, and its stories reminded the galaxy that monsters are not only things to be feared, but things to be understood. This is why the Rancor remains one of the most enduring creatures in Star Wars lore, not merely because of its claws or its jaws, but because of the encounters that made it legend, because it became a mirror for the galaxy's relationship with fear, with power, with nature, and with the beasts that dwell within us all. Rancors, reflections, monster, companion, and the tragedy of strength. To reflect on the Rancor is to confront the paradox of strength, for this beast, towering and terrifying, embodies at once the primal fear of being devoured and the quiet tragedy of power bent into servitude. And in its lumbering form, we glimpse not only the inevitability of nature's might, but the malleability of that might in the hands of those who would exploit it. The Rancor is massive, armored, armed with claws that rend steel and jaws that crush bone, yet for all its natural dominance, it is most often remembered not roaming the swamps of Dathomir, but chained in pits, enslaved by Hutts, ridden by Night Sisters, paraded by warlords, its existence twisted into a performance for the amusement or advantage of others. In this way, the Rancor becomes more than predator. It becomes metaphor, a living emblem of how strength, no matter how vast, can be captured, redirected, and turned against itself. Its very presence in Jabba's palace was not simply an executioner's tool, but a symbol of power, a demonstration that even the wildest monster could be enslaved, that Jabba's authority extended even to the forces of nature itself. And yet when Luke Skywalker slew that beast and its keeper wept openly, sobbing for the creature as one would for a beloved companion, the galaxy was reminded that the Rancor was not only monster, but pet, not only executioner, but friend, not only spectacle, but soul. This moment crystallized the duality of the Rancor. It terrifies because of its size and ferocity, but it also inspires sympathy because its life is so often defined by captivity, its identity shaped not by its own instincts, but by the chains placed upon it. The Rancor therefore symbolizes more than brute strength. It symbolizes tragedy, for it is a creature powerful enough to dominate its ecosystem, yet reduced by sentience into a tool of fear, its majesty hidden in pits, its roars muffled by walls, its instincts warped into entertainment. And in this tragedy lies reflection, for the Rancor forces us to ask whether the monster is truly the beast or the beings who enslave it, whether the real terror is its claws or our willingness to exploit them. The Night Sisters, who rode Rancors into war, treated them with ritual respect, weaving them into their culture, binding them not only with chains, but with sorcery, and in doing so revealed both reverence and dominance. They elevated the Rancor beyond mere predator, but they also stripped it of wildness, bending its might to their will. The Hutts, by contrast, reduced it to entertainment, caring little for its nature, seeing only the terror it inspired in victims and the cheers it elicited from audiences. Between these extremes, the Rancor becomes mirror, reflecting back to the galaxy its own relationship with power, showing that strength admired can also be strength exploited, that majesty revered can also be majesty chained. And yet, for all the exploitation, the Rancor's story is not only one of tragedy, but of connection, for those who lived alongside them often spoke of their loyalty, their intelligence, their surprising gentleness when treated with care. Trainers described them as capable of forming bonds, recognizing voices, responding to affection, even showing protective behavior toward those they trusted. These accounts complicate the myth of the Rancor as a mindless brute, suggesting instead a creature of depth, of personality, of quiet potential for companionship. The tears of Jabba's keeper at its death struck so deeply because they revealed that beneath the monster there was a bond, and in that bond lay grief. This grief reverberated across the galaxy because it reminded beings that monsters are not always what they seem, that behind the claws and teeth there can be hearts that feel, and that the line between predator and pet, between terror and loyalty, is thinner than we imagine. To meditate on the Rancor, then, is to meditate on strength in all its forms, on the power of nature to create a beast that can dominate entire ecosystems, on the power of civilization to chain that beast and make it spectacle, on the power of compassion to see beyond the monster into the companion, and on the power of tragedy to remind us that strength without freedom is not majesty but bondage. The Rancor is a symbol of fear because its roar embodies inevitability, because its claws tear away illusion, because its jaws remind us of mortality. But it is also a symbol of sorrow, because its captivity reflects our own exploitation of the wild, because its chains remind us of the ways strength is misused, because its death evokes not triumph, but grief. In this duality lies its enduring power in myth and memory, for the Rancor is both monster and mirror, reminding us that fear is never pure, that tragedy often hides behind terror, and that the strongest of creatures can still be prisoners. In the end, the Rancor is not only one of the galaxy's most dangerous beasts, it is one of its most human, embodying in its story the eternal truth that strength can inspire awe, fear, and pity all at once, and that the line between monster and companion is as fragile as the chain that binds them. Acklays, origins and evolution of Vendaxa's monstrous predators. The Acklay is a creature that looks less like it crawled out of the swamps of a single world and more like it stalked out of a nightmare, a monstrous blend of reptile and crustacean whose very form seems to have been shaped by a galaxy that delights in testing the limits of terror. And to trace its origins is to journey to Vendaxa, a remote and perilous world whose tangled marshes and crystalline seas serve as the crucible that forged this six-limbed predator into one of the deadliest beasts ever catalogued. Vendaxa is a planet defined by hostility, its ecosystem filled with vicious fauna and treacherous terrain where survival is earned through constant predation, and in such an environment the Acklay became apex, its towering body supported by 3 pairs of long-bladed limbs that allow it to scuttle across ground, rock, and shallow water with speed and grace that defy its size. Those limbs, jointed like scythes, end in curved talons capable of piercing armor and snapping bones with horrifying ease, and their length grants the Acklay both reach and agility, enabling it to strike prey from a distance before dragging it closer to the gaping maw that dominates its head. That maw, lined with countless needle-like teeth, is built for rending, tearing chunks of flesh with each bite, and survivors of Acklay attacks describe the sound of its feeding as something between crunching glass and grinding stone. Its carapace, thick and segmented, functions like natural armor, deflecting blaster fire and resisting blades, making it a predator against which even trained warriors struggle to prevail. Yet what makes the Acklay particularly terrifying is not simply its body, but the intelligence behind it, for it hunts with strategy, circling prey, herding it into traps, and striking not with frenzy, but with deliberate, precise movements, as though every kill is a calculated execution. The Acklay's evolution is rooted in Vendaxa's unique ecology, a world of shallow seas, murky lagoons, and dense swamplands that demanded both versatility and ferocity from its predators. To thrive here, the Acklay developed amphibious traits, equally at home skittering across rocky coastlines, diving beneath the waves, or emerging from the shadows of swamp reeds with sudden violence. Their bodies are designed for ambush, their coloration blending with the greens and browns of their environment, and their ability to remain motionless for long periods allows them to lie in wait until the precise moment of attack. When prey wanders too close, the Acklay erupts in motion, its 6 limbs striking in unison, its claws tearing through resistance, its body surging forward in a frenzy that leaves little hope of survival. This combination of patience and explosiveness made the Acklay king of Vendaxa feared by all other species, revered in myth by early settlers, and eventually sought after by those across the galaxy who craved living symbols of fear. The Geonosians, fascinated by creatures of savagery, imported Acklays into their arenas, where they became infamous during the Clone Wars as execution beasts, unleashed against prisoners for the entertainment of cheering crowds. When Obi-Wan Kenobi faced an Acklay in the Petranaki arena, the galaxy watched a Jedi Knight stand against a monster that seemed more a force of nature than an animal, its claws tearing through stone pillars, its roars echoing in the minds of all who saw it. And though Kenobi prevailed through skill and the Force, the encounter ensured the Acklay's place in galactic legend as one of the most formidable beasts ever unleashed in combat. The Acklay spread beyond Vendaxa was both deliberate and disastrous, for once smugglers, arena masters, and warlords recognized its value as spectacle and weapon, it was transported across systems, thriving wherever it was unleashed. Yet containment was nearly impossible, for the Acklay's intelligence, resilience, and sheer ferocity ensured that escapes were frequent and bloody. Colonies that imported them for study often paid with lives, as Acklays turned on their captors and established new hunting grounds, wiping out settlements before retreating into wilderness. Each such incident only deepened their legend, until the name Acklay itself became shorthand for death from the shadows, invoked in curses and warnings by soldiers and spacers alike. Unlike the Rathtar, which symbolized chaos, or the Nexu, which embodied cunning patience, the Acklay represented inevitability, for its size, armor, and weapons ensured that once it set its sights on prey, survival became an unlikely dream. In the swamps of Vendaxa and the pits of Geonosis alike, the Acklay's evolution and adaptability revealed a predator designed not only to kill, but to endure, a creature that has outlasted civilizations, that has been bent into spectacle and weapon yet never diminished, a beast whose very existence reminds the galaxy that nature's ingenuity in creating terror will always outstrip even the darkest imaginations of sentient beings. Acklays, encounters, myths, and reflections on inevitability. The Acklay's reputation is carved not only in the swamps of Vendaxa, but in the memories of those who survived its claws and the legends of those who did not, for every encounter with this towering predator reinforces the sense that it is not simply a beast, but inevitability given form, a creature whose presence strips away hope and replaces it with the certainty of death. The Geonosian arena remains the most infamous stage for Acklays, for when the insectoid overlords of Geonosis sought to create spectacles of terror, they knew the Acklay's appearance alone would silence crowds before it even struck. The sight of its 6-bladed limbs clattering against stone, the hiss of its maw filled with teeth, the guttural roar that reverberated like thunder, all combined into a vision of predation so complete that even seasoned warriors quailed. The galaxy will forever remember the day Obi-Wan Kenobi stood in the sands of the Petranaki arena, chained and unarmed, as the Acklay was released, its claws tearing through pillars of stone, its body moving with the speed and agility fragility of a nightmare, and though Kenobi triumphed by sheer skill and resourcefulness, the encounter proved to millions watching that even Jedi could be humbled by beasts born of nature's savagery. That single battle immortalized the Acklay in galactic imagination, ensuring that its name would be spoken with the same hushed dread as Rancor, Nexu, and Gundark. Beyond Geonosis, stories of Acklay attacks spread across the Outer Rim, each encounter amplifying their legend. Colonists who attempted to tame regions of Vendaxa vanished, their bodies left in shredded heaps that bore the unmistakable marks of claws slicing with surgical precision. Smugglers, transporting Acklays for arenas, often perished when containment failed. Their ships found adrift, holes clawed open, cargo holds soaked in blood. Bounty hunters who faced them in controlled hunts frequently never returned, and those who did spoke of the horror of watching comrades skewered on scythe-like limbs, lifted into the air and cast aside like broken dolls. Entire units of clone troopers recorded engagements with Acklays during the Clone Wars, and their reports describe not only the physical devastation, but the psychological impact, for soldiers trained to face battle droids and separatist generals were shaken to the core by a creature that could strike faster than blaster fire and withstand volleys of coordinated attack. To fight an Acklay was not to fight an animal, but to confront inevitability. For once its shadow fell across the ground, there was no sense of contest, only of survival measured in fleeting seconds. Myths around the Acklay grew naturally, for sentient beings confronted with such monsters cannot help but transform them into symbols. On Vendaxa, early settlers spoke of Acklays as the claws of the planet itself, guardians of the swamp sent to punish those who dared trespass upon land not meant to be tamed. On Geonosis, arena slaves prayed to never be chosen for an Acklay match, for they believed that to die beneath its claws was to be erased utterly, body and spirit consumed by something beyond mortal comprehension. In the wider galaxy, smugglers and spacers invoked its name in curses, while children whispered stories of Acklays stalking shadows, their limbs clicking in the night, waiting to strike. These myths did not exaggerate so much as crystallize the truth, that the Acklay embodies inevitability, that it does not merely kill, but annihilates hope, that its presence alone is enough to paralyze the will. Unlike the Rathtar, which overwhelms through chaos, or the Nexu, which hunts with stealth, the Acklay terrifies because it strips away the illusion of chance. To encounter one is to understand immediately that survival is not likely, that every weapon, every strategy, every hope is already crumbling beneath the shadow of its claws. In reflecting on the Acklay, one confronts not only a predator, but a meditation on fear itself. Fear is often rooted in uncertainty, in the unknown, in the question of what might happen, but the Acklay inverts this truth, for in its presence there is no uncertainty, only the cold clarity of inevitability. Its roar does not suggest the possibility of death, it promises it. Its claws do not threaten, they guarantee. In this way, the Acklay reveals the terror of certainty, the dread that comes not from possibility but from inevitability, for when one stands before it, the outcome is already written. This is why the Acklay has become such a powerful symbol in galactic myth, why its image endures not only as predator, but as metaphor, for it represents all the forces in life that cannot be avoided, all the shadows that cannot be outrun, all the endings that cannot be postponed. It is death made manifest, inevitability carved in claw and tooth, a reminder that no matter how far sentients rise above nature, they remain vulnerable to it. That no matter how strong their armies or how advanced their technology, there will always exist beasts that bring them back to the primal truth of survival. The Acklay endures not only as a beast of Vendaxa, but as a symbol of the terror of certainty, of the inevitability of death, of the fragility of courage when confronted with something that cannot be resisted. In this reflection lies its true legacy, for the Acklay is not just a predator, it is inevitability given form, and in remembering it, the galaxy remembers its own mortality. Krayt Dragons, Origins and evolution of Tatooine's apex beast. The Krayt Dragon is not only one of the most iconic creatures of Tatooine, but one of the most legendary predators in all of Star Wars, a name spoken with reverence and dread alike, for to hear its bone-rattling roar is to know that death itself slithers across the sands, and to understand its origins is to uncover the history of a beast that has dominated one of the harshest worlds in the galaxy for millennia. Tatooine is a planet that strips away weakness, a desert wasteland where suns scorch mercilessly by day, freezing winds sweep across the dunes by night, and life survives only through adaptation to scarcity. Yet in this hostile crucible, the Krayt Dragon emerged not merely as survivor, but as master, evolving into forms so vast and powerful that even the galaxy's greatest predators pale in comparison. Scholars have long debated the origins of the species, some believing they descended from aquatic reptilian ancestors who adapted as Tatooine dried into desert, others proposing that they were seeded by ancient Rakatan colonists who bred them as war beasts before abandoning them to the sands. Whatever their beginnings, the Krayt Dragon became perfectly attuned to Tatooine's barren landscape, its elongated body capable of slithering beneath dunes like a serpent, its claws digging effortlessly through shifting sand, its armored scales protecting it from heat, blasters, and the desperate strikes of prey. Two distinct varieties emerge through this evolution: the Canyon Krayt, smaller yet still colossal, dwelling in rocky valleys and caves, and the Greater Krayt, an immense leviathan capable of swallowing Bantha's whole, rarely seen except in whispered legends passed among Tusken raiders. These varieties, though different in scale, share the same defining qualities: unmatched size, terrifying power, and an aura of inevitability that makes them lords of the desert, predators to whom even apex hunters like the Sarlacc are rivals rather than masters. The Tusken Raiders, native to Tatooine's dunes, wove Krayt Dragons into their culture, treating them with reverence as symbols of fear and strength, crafting weapons from their bones and pearls from the stones formed in their stomachs. To slay a Krayt Dragon was the highest honor among the Tuskens, proof of courage and survival that elevated warriors into legends among their kind. The fabled Krayt Dragon Pearl, a rare and precious object created from the digestive processes of these leviathans, became one of the galaxy's most coveted treasures, valued both as a sign of prestige and as a resource in the crafting of lightsabers, for the pearls could be attuned to the Force, creating blades of exceptional resonance. Thus the Krayt Dragon transcended its biology to become a creature of myth and economy, a beast whose very body carried spiritual, cultural, and practical value, and whose slaying was celebrated and mourned alike. Yet for all their reverence, the Tuskens feared them deeply, for entire raiding parties could be annihilated if they stumbled upon a Krayt Dragon in the wrong place, and many oral traditions describe them as avatars of the desert itself, born from the sands, returning to the sands, immortal as the shifting dunes. In these stories, the Krayt is not merely predator, but God, a force of nature that punishes arrogance and rewards respect, a reminder that even the most fearsome of the Tuskens' own warriors must bow before the desert's true master. The galaxy at large learned of Krayt Dragons through explorers, settlers, and hunters who dared to cross the dunes. Though few encounters ended in survival, colonists spoke of hearing their roars echoing across miles, a sound so deep it seemed to vibrate through the bones, and of seeing the dunes ripple before the massive body broke the surface, sand exploding like water as the Leviathan emerged. Entire herds of Banthas were known to vanish into the maw of a Krayt, leaving only shattered bones to mark their passing. Starship captains navigating Tatooine's harsh terrain recorded seismic activity mistaken for earthquakes, only to realize too late that the shifting sands were caused by the movement of a burrowing Greater Krayt Dragon. Even the Jedi recorded encounters with them, treating them with caution and respect, noting in their archives that the creatures represented a form of raw power unshaped by the Force but terrifying nonetheless. For while a Jedi might defeat one in battle, the risk was immense and the cost often unbearable. Hunters who traveled to Tatooine seeking to kill one and claim a pearl frequently never returned, their weapons and bravado useless against a predator that had ruled the sands for millennia. Those who did succeed returned not only with trophies, but with haunted eyes, their stories, filled with descriptions of roars that shattered courage, claws that struck with the force of boulders, and a presence so overwhelming that it seemed less like fighting an animal and more like standing against the embodiment of the desert itself. The Krayt Dragons' evolution into apex predator was not only biological but symbolic, for in every story, in every myth, in every encounter, it came to embody the essence of inevitability, of power so immense that it humbles all who witness it. Unlike smaller predators, which kill with stealth or speed, the Krayt Dragon kills with scale, with the weight of its presence, with the certainty that once it has chosen to emerge, nothing in its path can stand. In this it becomes more than beast. It becomes myth made flesh, an echo of the galaxy's eternal truth that there will always be forces larger, stronger, older than ourselves, forces that remind us of our fragility. To meditate on the origins of the Krayt Dragon is to meditate on Tatooine itself, a planet of harsh extremes, of endless deserts, of survival earned through endurance and strength. For the Krayt Dragon is the desert's perfect child, shaped by its cruelty, crowned by its mastery, feared, revered, and remembered across the galaxy as the very definition of an apex predator. Krayt Dragons, encounters, myths, and reflections of the desert leviathans. The Krayt Dragon's reputation is not confined to the scorching dunes of Tatooine, but has spread across the galaxy through the stories of those who faced it and the myths of those who revered it. For every encounter with these colossal predators deepened the sense that they were not simply animals, but leviathans, embodiments of the desert's merciless will. Among the Tusken raiders, the Krayt Dragon became the heart of their oral traditions, a figure of terror and reverence whose slaying marked the passage of warriors into legend. Entire rituals were constructed around the hunt, with raiding parties setting out not merely to kill, but to prove worth before the eyes of their ancestors, and when one of these massive beasts fell, its bones were fashioned into weapons, and its pearls treasured as sacred tokens. These pearls, gleaming with strange luminescence, were believed to carry the essence of the desert itself, and Jedi who acquired them discovered that they could be attuned to the Force, creating lightsabers of unmatched resonance. Thus, the Krayt Dragon became a creature that bridged worlds, savage beast to the settlers, god to the Tuskens, and hidden benefactor to Jedi forging new blades. Its cultural symbolism extended even into the Empire's reign, for stormtroopers stationed on Tatooine spoke of how Tusken raiders invoked the dragon's roar in their war cries, a sound that sent shivers through ranks trained to fear little. Encounters with Krayt Dragons in recorded history remain few but unforgettable. Early settlers to Tatooine chronicled entire herds of banthas disappearing in moments, swallowed whole by greater Krayt Dragons that erupted from beneath the sand like living earthquakes. Hunters who dared to face them often underestimated their size, believing the canyon subspecies to be the pinnacle, only to hear tales of even larger beasts that slumbered beneath dunes for centuries. The most famous of these encounters came during the time of the New Republic, when a coalition of Tusken raiders and outsiders joined forces to bring down a greater Krayt Dragon that had terrorized entire regions of Tatooine. The battle became legend, remembered not only for its scale but for its symbolism, as those who had once been divided by culture and violence united to slay a beast too vast for any one people to conquer alone. Tales of that battle spread far beyond Tatooine, capturing imaginations across the galaxy, for it was a story of cooperation against inevitability, a reminder that even the most ancient predators could fall if the living united in courage. Yet even in triumph, survivors described the dragon not as vanquished but as eternal, its body consumed by sand, its legend only deepened by death, as though it had returned to the desert that birthed it. The Krayt Dragon's myth has been further cemented by the haunting power of its roar, a sound so deep and resonant that it carries across miles of desert, shaking the bones of those who hear it, freezing hearts with a dread as primal as it is unforgettable. To hear a Krayt Dragon is to know that survival is already in question, that the desert has awoken a beast too vast for blasters or bravery to easily overcome. This roar has become a symbol in itself, invoked in stories across the galaxy to describe overwhelming power or unyielding terror, its echo synonymous with the inevitability of nature's supremacy. Smugglers spoke of it in hushed tones as shorthand for hopeless odds, while poets in the core worlds, far from the sands of Tatooine, used it as metaphor for the unstoppable march of time, for the voice of mortality that cannot be ignored. Thus, the Krayt Dragon transcended its desert home to become a universal figure of myth, not only predator, but archetype, woven into the galaxy's imagination as a symbol of fear, majesty, and inevitability. To reflect upon the Krayt Dragon is to meditate on the nature of survival and the fragility of order, for in its immense size and ancient presence, it embodies the truth that there are always forces larger than ourselves, forces that demand respect and humility. The Tuskens understand this instinctively, for they do not see the dragon as merely beast, but as spirit, an expression of the desert soul, and in this they perhaps grasp its symbolism more fully than those who hunt it for sport or pearls. The settlers who curse its existence and the hunters who pursue its trophies see only the danger, but the Tuskens see the lesson, that the desert cannot be tamed, that the sands will always belong to the dragon, and that to live in such a world is to accept that some powers cannot be mastered, but only respected. The Jedi too recognize this, recording encounters in their archives not only as warnings of physical danger, but as meditations on humility, for the Krayt Dragon teaches that even those who wield the Force must bow before the raw inevitability of nature. It is not darkness, not chaos, not evil, but something older and more enduring, the embodiment of balance through dominance, the truth that in the endless desert only the strongest endure and even the strongest fall in time. The Krayt Dragon is thus more than a beast. It is myth, symbol, and reflection, the roar of the desert echoing across generations, reminding all who hear it that life is fragile, survival is precious, and the sands will always reclaim their own. Kohans, origins and evolution of the silent assassins. Among all the creatures catalogued in the galaxy, few inspire the particular kind of dread reserved for the Kohan, not because of overwhelming size or apocalyptic roars, but because of their silence, their subtlety, and the knowledge that by the time one is aware of their presence, it is already too late. Unlike the titanic Krayt Dragon or the monstrous Rancor, the Kohan does not need to dominate landscapes or command attention with spectacle. It thrives in shadows, in confined spaces, in the intimate closeness of predator and prey. Their origins remain somewhat mysterious, but most records trace them to the swampy regions of Indomodo and similar humid worlds, places where evolution shaped them into perfect assassins, serpentine arthropods whose segmented bodies glide silently over stone and metal, whose movements are as fluid as shadows passing across the ground. Measuring up to a meter in length, their sleek forms conceal devastating lethality, for each Kohan is armed with venomous fangs capable of piercing flesh and injecting toxins that paralyze, suffocate, or kill within moments. Unlike many predators, Kohans do not rely on strength or speed alone, but on cunning and stealth, able to squeeze through impossibly tight spaces, scale walls with ease, and remain hidden until the exact moment of attack. This ability to infiltrate and kill in silence is what has made them infamous across the galaxy, for they are not beasts that stumble upon prey. They are tools of murder, deliberately sought, captured, and employed by assassins and warlords who value their uncanny precision. The most infamous use of Kohans came during the twilight of the Republic, when they were employed in an assassination attempt against Senator Padme Amidala on Coruscant, smuggled into her chambers by mechanical devices that allowed them to slip past every guard, every protocol, every measure of security. That moment, when two Kohans slithered into the bedroom of one of the most important figures in the Republic, cemented their place in history, for it revealed that even in the heart of galactic civilization, surrounded by fleets and Jedi, there existed predators so quiet, so efficient, so perfectly designed for murder that they could strike at the very core of power. The attempt was foiled, but the terror it inspired endured, and the Kohun became synonymous not with wilderness or natural predation, but with assassination, with the weaponization of nature's most insidious traits. Bounty hunters and assassins prized them for exactly this reason, for Kohuns left little trace, their venom killing swiftly and often silently, their bodies vanishing back into shadows before alarms could sound. To those who employed them, they were the perfect weapon, feared not only for their lethality, but for the psychological impact of knowing that death could arrive in silence, coiling across the floor in the darkness, striking without warning. Evolution honed the Kohun for this role with uncanny precision. Their segmented bodies, armored with chitinous plates, protect them from physical harm, while their legs, spindly yet strong, allow them to cling to walls, ceilings, and even starship hulls. Their sensory organs, highly attuned to vibrations, enable them to detect the faintest movements of prey, giving them uncanny awareness of their surroundings and making it nearly impossible to surprise them. Their venom glands, located within their jaws, can produce multiple toxins of varying intensity, from paralytic agents that leave victims helpless but alive to neurotoxins that shut down respiratory systems within minutes. This versatility makes them not only effective hunters in their native swamps, but perfect tools for assassins seeking specific outcomes. Zoologists who studied Kohuns in controlled environments marveled at their precision, for they rarely struck without calculation, waiting patiently until prey was most vulnerable, and delivering a bite so quick and decisive that resistance was futile. In their natural habitats, they hunted amphibians, mammals, and even larger reptiles with ease, their venom ensuring that prey never escaped once bitten. Yet when introduced into the wider galaxy, their adaptability allowed them to thrive in urban environments, slipping through ventilation shafts, sewer systems, and the cracks of buildings, transforming them into predators as deadly in cities as in swamps. The Kohun's reputation is therefore distinct from other monstrous creatures, for it is not tied to spectacle but to inevitability. Where a rancor terrifies because its roar fills the air, the Kohun terrifies because its silence fills the imagination. Where a Krayt dragon dominates deserts through size, the Kohun dominates bedrooms, chambers, and strongholds. Through infiltration, their evolution into creatures of stealth reveals nature's capacity not only for overwhelming power, but for subtle terror, the kind of danger that undermines the very concept of safety. To know that Kohuns exist is to know that walls are meaningless, that guards can be bypassed, that locks are nothing to them, and that the very spaces sentients consider sanctuaries can become death traps when these creatures are near. This is why their image endures in myth and metaphor, why assassins speak of them with reverence, why nobles fear them more than armies. They are the predators that embody distrust, the beasts that symbolize paranoia, the reminder that danger does not always roar from the horizon, but can slither in silence across the floor, climb the walls, and strike in the night while one dreams of safety. The Kohun is not only an assassin's tool, but a reflection of fear itself, the fear that safety is an illusion, that death waits in silence, that the shadow in the corner may not be empty, that the quiet hiss in the dark may be the last sound one hears. Geonosian Brain Worms. Origins and the terror of parasitic control. Among all the creatures catalogued in the galaxy, few inspire a horror as insidious as the Geonosian Brain Worms, for while predators such as rancors or Krayt Dragons terrify with the certainty of physical destruction, these small pale parasites wield a far more intimate power, the ability to invade the mind, to strip away autonomy, and to transform their victims into living husks of obedience. Their origins, like their appearance, are unsettling, believed to stem from the deep subterranean hives of Geonosis, a world already infamous for its insectoid inhabitants and their labyrinthine warrens. Buried beneath the sands and stone of this harsh planet, the worms evolved not as apex predators, but as parasites, slender, serpentine organisms adapted to infiltrate living hosts and seize control of their nervous systems. Though simple in appearance, pale, segmented bodies that writhe with unsettling fluidity. They represent one of the most terrifying evolutionary strategies in the galaxy, for their survival depends not on strength or speed, but on the subjugation of other beings. A worm enters through the nasal passages, the mouth, or even open wounds, burrowing deep until it coils around the host's brain, at which point the victim ceases to be an individual and becomes a puppet, their will erased, their thoughts silenced, their body enslaved to the parasite's commands. Unlike predators who kill swiftly, the brain worm kills identity, hollowing out the host while leaving the shell alive, and in that act it inspires a dread far deeper than death, the dread of losing oneself. The full extent of their capabilities was revealed during the Clone Wars, when outbreaks among clone troopers exposed the chilling reality of their control. On the frozen world of Auto-Plutonia and later aboard Republic starships, brain worms spread rapidly through ranks of soldiers, turning brothers in arms into enemies overnight, their eyes glazed, their voices hollow, their movements devoid of their usual discipline and camaraderie. Jedi and commanders found themselves confronted not with an enemy that could be fought in open battle, but with friends whose wills had been stolen, forcing them to strike down those they had sworn to protect or serve beside. These incidents etched the brain worms into galactic consciousness as one of the most insidious threats ever encountered, for unlike the visible menace of Sith or separatist droids, these creatures could hide within allies, spreading unseen until it was too late. The horror lay not only in the worms themselves, but in the erosion of trust, for in their presence no one could be certain of who was free and who was enslaved. This paranoia transformed them from mere parasites into symbols of infiltration, a natural reflection of the political treachery already tearing the Republic apart. Biologically, the worms' adaptations are horrifyingly efficient. Their bodies secrete enzymes that dull the host's pain and mask the invasion, ensuring that the victim often feels nothing until control has already been lost. Once inside, they coil around the brainstem, sending tendrils into neural pathways, hijacking motor control and suppressing higher cognitive function. The host becomes a soldier for the worm's survival, spreading it to others, obeying instincts not its own. Unlike the Kuhun, which kills with venom, or the Rathtar, which kills with chaos, the brain worm does not destroy the body. It preserves it, using it as a vessel, ensuring that the parasite thrives even as the host's identity is erased. In this lies their true terror, that they corrupt what is familiar, transform allies into enemies, turn trust into danger. For beings across the galaxy, whose societies depend on bonds of loyalty, friendship, and community, the idea of parasites that erase willpower strikes at the very foundation of civilization. Legends surrounding their origins among the Geonosians add another layer of dread. Some whisper that the worms were not mere accidents of evolution, but the byproducts of ancient experiments in the Geonosian hives, attempts to weaponize nature's ability to control. Others believe they are remnants of deeper, older life beneath Geonosis' crust, predators from a time before the Geonosians themselves, creatures that adapted from ancient subterranean parasites into their modern form. Whatever their true origin, the brain worms became inseparable from Geonosis in galactic imagination, seen as natural extensions of the world's insectoid cruelty, as though the very planet itself specialized in subjugation. Their connection to the hive world's endless themes of control and obedience gave them symbolic weight, for they revealed that domination need not come from armies or empires. It could come from something small, unseen, crawling into one's mind and silencing the self forever. To reflect on the brain worms is to meditate on the nature of freedom and the fragility of identity, for they strip away what makes a being who they are and reduce them to nothing more than a hollow vessel. They are terrifying, not because they kill, but because they enslave, not because they roar, but because they whisper into the mind and extinguish the flame of autonomy. In their presence, one realizes that the most precious treasure is not survival of the body, but survival of the self, and that death may, in truth, be preferable to life without will. In this, they become not only a biological horror, but a philosophical one, reminders that the greatest fear is not annihilation, but subjugation, not destruction, but domination, and that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not the ones that tower above us, but the ones that slip quietly into our minds and make us forget that we were ever free. Geonosian Brain Worms, Outbreaks, Paranoia, and Reflections on the Loss of Self. The outbreaks of Geonosian brain worms during the Clone Wars are remembered not only for the physical danger they posed, but for the psychological terror they unleashed. For few events so vividly demonstrated the fragility of trust and the ease with which the bonds of loyalty can be broken than the sight of once loyal clone troopers marching like hollow marionettes under the sway of pale parasites that had stolen their will. On the frozen world of Autoplutonia, a unit of clones fell victim to the worms, their bodies animated by alien control, their voices stripped of individuality, their movements robotic and eerie, and when their brothers confronted them, hesitation spread faster than blaster fire, for to kill them was to kill comrades, men who had trained and fought alongside them, men whose laughter had once filled mess halls, men who were now reduced to puppets of something unseen. The horror was compounded by the worm's ability to spread, slipping from one host to another, infiltrating entire squads in silence, turning cohesion into chaos in hours. Aboard starships, outbreaks magnified the dread even further, as narrow corridors became killing fields where soldiers fought not droids or Sith, but friends whose eyes had glazed into lifeless stares, whose weapons were now aimed at their own brothers. Jedi and commanders forced to deal with these infestations spoke of the suffocating tension of not knowing who was still free and who had been compromised, of watching every movement, every hesitation, every word for signs of corruption, and in that paranoia, the worms achieved their most insidious victory, breaking trust long before bodies fell. These outbreaks etched the worms into legend as one of the most disturbing creatures ever discovered, because they struck not with brute strength, but with subtle infiltration, undermining the very concept of security. Soldiers began to whisper about them as living nightmares, using their name as curses to describe betrayal or suspicion, and commanders found that the psychological scars of these incidents lingered long after the worms were purged. For the clones, bred for unity, for trust, for unquestioning loyalty, the idea that their minds could be stolen was devastating, for it revealed that their greatest strength, their bond as brothers, could also be their greatest weakness, easily unraveled by parasites that cared nothing for loyalty or love. Among the Jedi, reflections on the outbreaks turned philosophical, as masters noted that the worms represented the most terrifying form of domination, a domination of will that mirrored the manipulations of the dark side itself. For if the Sith enslaved minds through fear and temptation, the brain worms enslaved through biology, reducing even the most disciplined warrior to an empty husk. This parallel deepened the worms' symbolic weight, transforming them in the Jedi imagination into more than parasites, but into natural echoes of the very corruption they sought to resist in the Force. Beyond the Republic, tales of the worms spread into the wider galaxy, where smugglers, bounty hunters, and common folk repeated them in hushed voices, exaggerating the parasites into phantoms capable of controlling entire cities overnight. Whether truth or myth, these stories magnified their legend, ensuring that the brain worms became shorthand for paranoia itself. Nobles in the core invoked them in political rhetoric, comparing their rivals to parasites eating away at the Republic, while Outer Rim settlers told stories to children, warning them that disobedience would allow worms to crawl into their minds. In every retelling, the theme was the same: the fear of losing control, of losing oneself, of waking to discover that the body remains alive but the will has been extinguished. This fear is universal, transcending species and culture, because it speaks to the most intimate terror, that our autonomy, our very essence, is fragile, and that it can be taken without warning, without mercy, without recourse. To meditate on the brain worms is to meditate on identity itself, for they force us to ask what it means to be alive if choice is gone, if freedom is stolen. Unlike the Rancor, which terrifies through brute inevitability, or the Nexu, which terrifies through shadowed cunning, The brain worm terrifies through the annihilation of will. It is not the destruction of the body that horrifies, but the preservation of it, animated by something alien, empty of the self that once resided within. In this, they symbolize the deepest fears of control, whether by parasite, by Sith, or by empire, for the galaxy has always wrestled with forces that seek to subjugate individuality. The worms reveal that domination need not be spectacular to be total. It can be silent, it can be small, it can slip into the mind unseen and extinguish what makes us who we are. They remind us that death is not the only ending to fear, that sometimes worse than dying is continuing to live without freedom, without choice, without self. And in this reflection, the Geonosian Brain Worms endure in galactic imagination not merely as biological horrors, but as symbols of the fragility of identity, the inevitability of vulnerability, and the eternal truth that the greatest monsters are not always those that tower over us, but those that slither silently within, stealing not our lives, but our very souls. Zillow Beast. Origins and the awakening of a galactic titan. The Zillow Beast stands apart from all other creatures in the galaxy, not merely for its size or its terrifying power, but because its very existence feels like a living fossil from another age. A colossal reminder of a time when monsters shaped the fate of worlds and civilizations had to contend with forces so massive that they seemed like gods walking the surface of planets. Its origins trace back to Malastare, a world known for its podrises and its dangerous wildlife, but even among the native predators of that hostile planet, the Zillow Beast reigned supreme as the ancient apex, a being whose armored scales rendered it impervious to blaster fire, whose roar shattered the courage of entire armies, and whose immense bulk shook the ground with every step. Legends among the Dug people of Malastare spoke of the Zillow Beast as a godlike terror that slumbered beneath the planet's surface, a force of destruction that could not be slain, and so their culture grew around rituals of avoidance rather than conquest, for they knew that to awaken it was to invite catastrophe. Yet during the Clone Wars, the galaxy learned that this legend was no myth, for in the chaos of a battle fought with seismic weapons on Malastare's surface, the Zillow Beast was unearthed from its subterranean prison, towering higher than buildings, its scales gleaming in the sunlight, its roar shaking the sky. To see it rise was to witness the resurrection of a nightmare. A titan from a forgotten age suddenly thrust into a galaxy that had fought itself free of such monsters. The creature's biology revealed why it had endured for so long. Its scales, immense plates of natural armor, proved impervious to conventional weapons, deflecting blaster bolts, resisting explosives, and even withstanding the crushing weight of tanks and artillery. Scientists marveled at this resilience, recognizing that its biology represented one of the most perfect natural defenses ever recorded, and the Republic, already embroiled in war, coveted this armor as a key to invincibility. But the Zillow Beast was not simply a passive relic, it was alive, furious, and immensely intelligent. Its movements were not random but deliberate, as it lashed out at those who sought to capture it, its claws tearing through droid legions, its tail flattening vehicles, its roar scattering armies. Unlike predators that hunt for food, the Zillow Beast fought with the fury of something that had been disturbed, awakened from a slumber it had never chosen, and in its fury one could sense not only animal instinct, but a kind of ancient will, a drive to resist the chains civilization sought to impose upon it. When the Republic succeeded in capturing the beast, transporting it to Coruscant for study, it only magnified the sense of hubris that had plagued civilizations for ages, for the creature was not a tool to be dissected or weaponized. It was a titan, a being whose very existence defied containment. Its escape upon Coruscant's gleaming cityscape was a moment that forever entered galactic history, as crowds of millions looked up at the towering silhouette of the Zillow Beast roaring above their Durasteel towers, a living contradiction to their belief that technology had tamed the galaxy, a reminder that nature still held dominion in forms they could not hope to control. The awakening of the Zillow Beast revealed more than the resilience of its scales or the ferocity of its form. It revealed the arrogance of the Republic, and by extension, all civilizations that believe nature can be conquered. For in their desire to strip its body for secrets, to use its biology for war, they repeated the same mistakes of countless cultures before them, underestimating the wild, overestimating their control, and inviting destruction. The beast became a mirror of civilization's hubris, showing that the most dangerous threats are often those unearthed by our own hands, those awakened by our own weapons, those provoked by our refusal to respect the boundaries of nature. The Zillow Beast was not evil, not driven by malice or hunger, but by the instinct to survive, to lash out at those who threatened it, and in this it embodied the truth that sometimes the greatest monsters are not born, but made, drawn forth by the arrogance of those who disturb what should remain undisturbed. Its rampage across Coruscant remains one of the most haunting events of the Clone Wars, not because of the deaths it caused, but because of the questions it raised. If creatures such as this still lurk beneath the surfaces of forgotten worlds, how fragile is the galaxy's illusion of control? How many other titans slumber, waiting for seismic charges or greedy explorers to awaken them? And when they rise, will civilization again mistake them for weapons rather than wonders, threats rather than warnings? To meditate on the origins and awakening of the Zillow Beast is to meditate on the inevitability of confrontation between nature and civilization, on the arrogance of believing that technology and armies can dominate a galaxy that is far older, far wilder, far more resilient than we are. The Zillow Beast endures as a legend not simply because of its scales or its roar, but because it embodies this tension, because it reminds us that the galaxy has always been home to forces beyond our understanding, beyond our control, beyond our dominion. It is a titan, a relic, a mirror, a warning carved in claw and roar, reminding us that no matter how high we build our towers, the ground beneath them may yet shake, and something older than empires may rise to remind us that we are never as safe, never as powerful, never as in control as we believe. Zillow Beast. Symbolism, escape, and reflections on hubris. The escape of the Zillow Beast upon Coruscant remains one of the most haunting moments of the Clone Wars, not because of the scale of destruction it wrought, though entire districts trembled under its claws and towers crumbled in its wake, but because of what it revealed about the fragility of the galaxy's most powerful civilization, for in a single night, the shining city planet that symbolized order, technology, and mastery over the stars was reduced to chaos by a single beast from the depths of a forgotten world. Crowds of millions looked upward as the Titan's silhouette loomed against the skyline, its roar echoing across Durasteel canyons, a sound so ancient and primal that it seemed to drown out the hum of speeders and the chatter of markets, replacing civilization's noise with the reminder of nature's voice. Soldiers and Jedi scrambled in vain to contain it, their blasters useless against its impenetrable scales, their tactics collapsing before its sheer size and strength, and as the Zillow Beast tore through streets and plazas, it became a living metaphor for hubris, for the arrogance of a republic that thought it could capture, study, and exploit nature's most ancient survivor without consequence. To the citizens of Coruscant, who had long believed themselves safe in the core, far from the wild dangers of Outer Rim worlds, the Zillow Beast was not merely a monster, it was a revelation, a reminder that no wall, no army, no fleet could ever render the galaxy tame, that chaos and wilderness could rise even in the heart of order, and that the natural world, though buried and forgotten, still had the power to humble empires. The symbolism of the Zillow Beast deepened as the Republic's scientists sought to strip it of secrets, coveting its indestructible scales as the key to invincible armor, yet in doing so they revealed a truth more unsettling than its roar, that the greatest danger the creature posed was not in its claws or tail, but in the greed it inspired. The Republic did not see a living wonder, a relic of an ancient era. It saw only a resource to be harvested, a weapon to be repurposed, a material to be exploited, and in this it mirrored the very arrogance that had awakened the beast on Malastaf. For the Zillow Beast symbolizes not only the supremacy of nature, but the self-destructive tendencies of civilization, the endless hunger to dominate, to dissect, to control, even when the lesson is clear that such forces cannot be mastered. In its thrashing and in its escape, the Zillow Beast exposed the Republic's inability to see beyond its war, to respect the balance of life, to comprehend that some beings exist not to be tamed, but to be left in peace. Palpatine himself, in his hidden machinations, sought to exploit it further, seeing in its scales an opportunity to strengthen his empire, and thus the Zillow Beast became not only a creature of nature, but a pawn in the greater story of galactic corruption, another victim of hubris disguised as progress. In cultural memory, the Zillow Beast endures as both warning and wonder. To the people of Malastare, its awakening vindicated generations of dog legends, proving that the stories of subterranean gods were not mere superstition, but truth, and their reverence for its power became a quiet reminder that ancient knowledge should never be dismissed. To the citizens of Coruscant, its escape became an enduring trauma, a reminder that even the core, the supposed heart of safety, could be shaken by forces beyond understanding, and that the gleaming towers of civilization were fragile when measured against the weight of a single titan. In later years, stories of the beast circulated across cantinas and academies alike, some painting it as a monster of unparalleled terror, others as a tragic victim of arrogance, and still others as a symbol of nature's right to endure despite the galaxy's endless march toward industrial domination. The Zillow Beast thus became more than a creature. It became myth, a figure invoked in philosophy and politics, its name synonymous with the dangers of unchecked ambition and the limits of control. To reflect upon the Zillow Beast is to meditate on the eternal balance between civilization and wilderness, between arrogance and humility, between mastery and respect. The beast itself was not malicious, not cunning, not even predatory in the traditional sense. It fought because it was provoked, it rampaged because it was captured, it resisted because it was chained. In this it mirrors countless lessons of history, for empires that awaken forces they cannot control always fall to the same fate, humbled by what they thought they could bend to their will. The Zillow Beast represents this lesson in its purest form, its massive form crashing through. Coruscant's towers as a living parable that progress without respect becomes destruction, that greed blinds civilizations to danger, and that hubris is always punished in time. It symbolizes the supremacy of nature, not because it cannot be defeated, but because it will always endure. Because no matter how advanced the galaxy becomes, no matter how high its towers rise, there will always be something older, something deeper, something that roars back against the illusion of control. In its scales we see invincibility, in its roar, inevitability, and in its story the eternal reminder that civilization's pride will always be fragile before the power of the wild. Summa Verminoth, Origins and the Terror of the Deep Void. The Summa Verminoth are unlike any other creatures catalogued in the galaxy, for while Gundarks stalk canyons, Krayt Dragons rule deserts, and Rancors thunder through swamps, these leviathans dwell in the endless silence of space itself, their vast bodies drifting through the void like living shadows, their many eyes glimmering faintly as though reflecting the light of forgotten stars, their tentacles uncoiling in slow, deliberate arcs that stretch for hundreds of meters. Their origins are wrapped in mystery and legend, for few who have encountered them have survived to tell the tale, and fewer still have studied them long enough to unravel the truth of what they are. Some scholars argue that they are ancient survivors of a primordial age, remnants of the galaxy's first wave of life that adapted not to planets but to the void itself, evolving in the gravity wells of nebulae and black holes, sustained by energies and forces incomprehensible to conventional biology. Others whisper that they are not natural at all, but the experiments of some long-extinct civilization, creations designed as guardians or weapons that were abandoned when their makers fell. Whatever their origins, the Summa Verminoth endure in the haunted regions of space, most notably the Akadisa Maelstrom, where their immense forms lurk within storms of plasma and gravity rifts, waiting in the swirling chaos like phantoms of eternity. To stumble upon one in such a place is to feel as though the void itself has grown eyes, as though the galaxy has awakened something too ancient to comprehend. And in that moment, even the bravest pilots know that survival is a mercy, not a certainty. The most detailed accounts of the Summa Verminoth come from those who braved the Maelstrom, a region of space so turbulent that navigation itself is a death sentence without extraordinary skill. Han Solo's fabled escape through this storm is often cited in connection with these creatures, for within those shifting clouds of plasma and gravitational distortions, the silhouette of a Summa Verminoth emerged, a monstrous entity so vast that its body seemed to eclipse the stars, its tentacles writhing against the storm as though it were a part of it, as though the beast and the Maelstrom were one. Its maw, a spiraling abyss lined with jagged protrusions, opened like the event horizon of a black hole, and in that moment, it was not simply predator, but cosmic inevitability, a reminder that the void itself devours. The terror of such encounters is compounded by their sheer scale, for where Rathtars overwhelm with chaos and rankles dominate with presence, the Summa Verminoth annihilate with enormity, reducing starships to specks before their eyes, making entire fleets seem small and fragile. Pilots who survived these encounters spoke of feeling not only fear, but insignificance, as though the galaxy itself had stared back at them through the countless eyes of the Leviathan, as though they were not prey but nothing, irrelevant in the face of such magnitude. Their biology, insofar as it can be understood, is a contradiction to everything known about life. How do such titans survive in the vacuum of space without atmosphere or sustenance? Some theorists suggest that their vast bodies are adapted to absorb ambient energy from nebulae and plasma storms, feeding not on flesh, but on radiation, gravity, and light itself. Others propose that they sustain themselves through predation on ships and creatures, unfortunate enough to stray into their domain, their tentacles ensnaring vessels and dragging them toward that moor where even metal and energy are ground into fuel. Yet the truth may be even stranger, for in their immense presence, one senses not merely biology, but something that borders on the metaphysical, as though they are not creatures in the traditional sense, but manifestations of the void given flesh. Their eyes, dozens or even hundreds of them, gleam like dying stars, and many who have seen them describe the sensation of being observed not as animals observe prey, but as something older and vaster observes the fleeting sparks of mortal life. This impression has led some to speculate that the Summa Verminoth possess intelligence, not in the sense of civilizations, but in the sense of cosmic awareness, a mind as vast and alien as the storms they inhabit, a consciousness that dwarfs the comprehension of sentient beings. The myths surrounding them reinforce this sense of cosmic dread. Smugglers and spacers whisper of entire fleets swallowed in silence, of starships dragged screaming into moors that closed like collapsing suns, of crews who stared into their countless eyes and went mad before being consumed. Religious sects in remote systems have elevated the Summa Verminoth into symbols of cosmic judgment, worshipping them as gods of destruction, avatars of the void's hunger, reminders that all life is temporary before the endless night. Even on worlds that have never seen them, their legend persists. Their name invoked as curses or omens, their existence treated as proof that the galaxy is not a place of safety, but of endless mystery, where the stars themselves conceal monsters greater than imagination. And perhaps that is their truest terror, that they reveal the galaxy's scale in a way few other creatures can. A Gundark reminds us of strength, a Nexu of stealth, a Rathtar of chaos, a Krayt Dragon of inevitability, but the Summa Verminoth remind us of insignificance, of how small we are against the canvas of the cosmos, of how fragile even our greatest ships and weapons are when measured against a beast that drifts through storms older than empires. To meditate on the origins of the Summa Verminoth is to meditate on the terror of the void itself. For they are not predators of flesh and blood alone, but of perspective, creatures that annihilate not only ships but certainty, reminding us that the galaxy is older, vaster, and stranger than we dare believe. They symbolize the truth that the stars we navigate are not ours, that the void we cross is not empty, that life is not confined to what we can comprehend. They are the embodiment of cosmic dread, leviathans that prove there are still monsters waiting in the dark, that the void still hungers, and that in the endless expanse of space, we are but fleeting sparks passing through the gaze of something ancient enough to remember the beginning and patient enough to await the end. Summa Verminoth. Encounters, myths, and reflections on the unknown. The encounters with the Summa Verminoth are remembered less as battles and more as brushes with the unfathomable. Moments when sentient beings who had charted the stars and conquered entire systems suddenly found themselves reduced to trembling fragments of life, adrift in the gaze of something so immense, so alien, so ancient that it felt as if the galaxy itself had decided to swallow them whole. The Akkadi's Maelstrom remains the most infamous place of such sightings, for within its storms of plasma and gravity wells the vast shadows of these leviathans drift, indistinguishable from the chaos until they move, until their countless eyes gleam faintly through the storm, until the arcs of their tentacles stretch outward like the arms of the void itself. Pilots tell stories of ships ensnared in those coiling limbs, dragged inexorably toward the spiraling abyss of their moors, where even metal screamed as it was torn apart. And though most such tales end with silence and loss, there are rare survivors whose words passed into legend, survivors who spoke of the overwhelming sensation of being observed, of staring into those galaxy-spanning eyes and feeling not merely fear, but the annihilation of significance, the realization that to such beings we are not prey or adversaries, but dust, sparks flickering for a heartbeat in the endless night. Han Solo's daring escape from one during his flight through the Maelstrom has become the most famous of these stories. But even in victory, the tale is less about triumph than about survival, less about courage than about luck, for to evade the Summa Verminoth is not to defeat it, but to flee the gaze of eternity and live to tell the tale. The myths born from these encounters are as vast as the creatures themselves. Smugglers whisper of fleets that vanished without trace, swallowed by a single beast whose hunger knew no end. Pilgrims in fringe systems revere them as gods of destruction, worshipping the Summa Verminoth as living embodiments of the void, titans that remind mortals that all life is temporary and all light will one day be extinguished. Poets in the core invoke their names as metaphors for despair, for inevitability, for the silence that awaits all things, while soldiers curse them as omens when marching into battles they know cannot be won. Entire cults have sprung up in the shadows of the outer rim, painting murals of their many eyes upon walls, chanting hymns to the tentacled leviathans that drift through storms, believing that to glimpse one is to glimpse truth itself. The truth that the galaxy is not ours, that the stars are not safe, that the void will always have the final word. These myths vary in detail, but all converge upon the same idea, that the Summa Verminoth are not simply animals, but manifestations of the unknown, reminders that beyond every map and every navigational chart lies mystery, danger, and the humbling vastness of creation. To reflect on the Summa Verminoth is to meditate on insignificance, for no other creature so thoroughly annihilates the illusion of mastery that civilizations cling to. The Republic, the Empire, the Jedi, the Sith, all their wars, all their empires, all their philosophies shrink to nothing in the shadow of these titans, for they reveal that the galaxy is older and vaster than any of us, that the struggles of empires are but sparks against the canvas of eternity. To stand before a rancor is to fear death, to face a Krayt Dragon is to fear inevitability, but to glimpse the Summa Verminoth is to fear meaninglessness, to feel in one's bones that the galaxy does not revolve around us, that our fleets and our towers and our temples are fragile constructs that will one day vanish, leaving the void to continue in silence. They are terror, not because they kill, but because they remind us that in the grand scale of the cosmos, we are not conquerors or rulers, but fleeting lives, fragile as whispers, fragile as sparks, fragile as dreams. And yet in this reflection lies a kind of awe, for though they embody dread, they also embody wonder, proof that the galaxy still holds mysteries beyond imagining, that life exists in forms that defy understanding, that there are still monsters waiting in the dark, reminding us that exploration is never finished and that humility is always demanded. The Summa Verminoth symbolize the ultimate truth of the galaxy, that the unknown will always be greater than the known, that insignificance is not defeat but perspective, and that in the endless silence of space, where leviathans drift with eyes like stars, we are reminded not only of fear, but of the beauty of mystery itself.